Greg slammed the badge down on the desk. "You're done. Clean out your locker." Ethan Walker had just saved that company from a catastrophic failure. The night before, stayed until 9 p.m., replaced seals that were 3 days from blowing under full load, protected every worker on that floor. And Greg Holloway fired him for it anyway. Ethan didn't argue, didn't beg. He picked up his final paycheck, walked past 11 years of his life, and drove away. 6 hours later, rain, a burning highway, a crushed SUV, and a woman trapped inside, he ran toward the fire while everyone else stood frozen and watched. He didn't know who she was. He would find out in the morning. So would Greg. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story is traveling. And if you've ever been the person who got punished for doing the right thing, hit subscribe, because this one's for you. There is a particular kind of invisible that only certain men know, not the invisible of being shy or quiet or forgettable at a party. This is something deeper. Something that settles into a man's bones after years of doing everything right and watching the credit float up to someone else's desk. It's the invisible of competence that nobody bothers to name. The invisible of loyalty that nobody bothers to reward. The invisible of a man who keeps showing up, keeps fixing things, keeps holding the whole operation together, while the people above him are too busy congratulating themselves to notice the floor isn't caving in because of them. Ethan Walker knew that invisible like an old scar. He'd been carrying it for 11 years. He was 36 years old on the morning everything changed. Though changed is too gentle a word for what happened that day. Collided is better. Detonated. The kind of morning that splits a life into before and after, whether a man is ready or not. Howe was up at 5:47 a.m., not because an alarm told him to be, but because his body had given up on sleep somewhere around 4:30, when his mind started running through the equipment logs he'd reviewed the night before. There was a hydraulics pressure issue in line 3 that nobody else had caught yet. He'd flagged it twice in the system. Both times the flag had been acknowledged and ignored. That happened a lot at Riverside Industrial Solutions. High mod coffee, the cheap kind, the kind that tastes like it's apologizing for existing, and stood at the kitchen window while Columbus was still gray and quiet outside. His daughter Mia's backpack was already by the door. She was 7, and she had inherited her mother's gift for being ready before anyone asked her to be. Some mornings that made Ethan smile. Some mornings it made him have to look away. He heard her feet on the stairs before he saw her. "Dad." Her voice was still half asleep, her hair going in 4 different directions. She was wearing the shirt with the rocket ship on it. She wore it at least 3 times a week, and Ethan had learned not to fight that battle. "Is there cereal?" "There is cereal," he said. "The good kind." "Define good." She made a face at him. He poured the cereal. She sat at the table and opened a library book she'd already read twice, and for 4 minutes the world was ordinary and quiet, and Ethan almost forgot what was waiting for him at work. Almost. Riverside Industrial Solutions sat on the east side of Columbus, a sprawling manufacturing campus that had been processing and distributing industrial components since before Ethan was born. The company had grown considerably over the last decade. New contracts, new facilities, new management layers, but the culture had calcified somewhere along the way. It was the kind of place that talked a great deal about innovation and spent most of its energy protecting the existing hierarchy. Ethan had started there 11 years ago as a contract engineer, fresh out of a career that had been moving in a very different direction. He had degrees. He had patents on his record, 2 of them both in hydraulic systems design, both licensed and generating royalties for a firm where he no longer worked. He had been for a brief window in his late 20s exactly the kind of engineer that companies compete to recruit. Then his wife got sick. Claire was 31 when the diagnosis came. 33 when she died. In between those 2 numbers was a stretch of time that Ethan did not talk about with strangers and rarely talked about with anyone at all. He had kept working during that time, kept his head above water, kept showing up. And when Claire was gone, and he was alone with Mia, who was 2 years old and would not remember her mother's voice, Ethan made a deliberate choice. He chose stability over ambition. He chose a job with predictable hours, a consistent paycheck, and a physical location he could drive to and from in under 20 minutes. He chose to stop chasing the engineering career that had once felt like a calling and start being the thing that Mia needed most present: reliable. There. He took the maintenance supervisor position at Riverside because they offered it, because it paid enough, and because it asked nothing of him that he couldn't give while still being a father first. That was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. 11 years have a way of making temporary arrangements permanent. By the time Ethan had been at Riverside for 3 years, he had quietly transformed the maintenance department in ways that management noticed without understanding. Equipment failure rates were down significantly. Response times were faster. His team had a culture of catching problems early, preventive thinking rather than reactive panic, and this had saved the company real money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years if anyone had bothered to run the analysis. Nobody ran the analysis. What they did notice was that maintenance costs in Ethan's department were under budget for the 4th consecutive year, and they attributed this to operational efficiency improvements in a quarterly report that did not include Ethan's name anywhere in the document. He read that report in the break room during his lunch break and said nothing. That was around year 4. By year 7, he had learned to exist in a particular way at Riverside, competent enough to be indispensable, quiet enough to be overlooked, careful enough never to step on the wrong toes. It was a survival strategy that cost him something every day, a slow and quiet erosion of the version of himself that had once had ideas worth having. But he paid it without complaint because Mia was growing up healthy and happy and didn't know the difference, and some mornings that felt like enough. Some mornings it didn't. Greg Holloway had been Ethan's manager for the last 3 years, and in Ethan's private assessment, which he kept extremely private, Greg was the specific kind of dangerous that comes with just enough competence to get promoted and not enough self-awareness to know where his actual abilities ended. Greg was 44, polished in the way of men who had spent considerable time cultivating the appearance of authority rather than developing it. He wore good suits to a manufacturing facility, which told you something. He spoke in the confident declarative sentences of a man who had been told he was smart so many times that the feedback loop had become self-sustaining and self-sealing. He did not ask questions of his subordinates, because in Greg's understanding of the world, asking questions of people below you signaled uncertainty, and uncertainty was a vulnerability he refused to display. This created problems. Specific mechanical, entirely preventable problems. The first time Ethan brought a serious concern to Greg was 3 years ago, shortly after Greg had arrived. The issue was a recurring vibration pattern in the secondary milling equipment. The kind of subtle rhythmic malfunction that to an untrained ear meant nothing, and to a trained engineer meant a bearing was failing in a way that would within 60 to 90 days cause a catastrophic seizure of the entire milling assembly. Ethan had written up a 1-page summary. Maintenance logs, vibration frequency data, projected failure timeline, estimated cost of repair now versus cost of repair after catastrophic failure. Greg had looked at the page for approximately 15 seconds. "I appreciate the diligence," Greg said, which was something he said when he meant, "I'm going to ignore this. But I'm not seeing a performance issue that warrants an emergency repair budget. Let's monitor it." "With respect," Ethan said. "Monitoring it is how we get to a catastrophic failure. The bearing is all ready." "I said we'll monitor it," Greg said. His tone did not change. It was the tone of a man who had already ended the conversation in his head. "Thank you, Ethan." 47 days later, the milling assembly seized during a production run. The line was down for 9 days. The repair cost was $412,000 plus lost production. Greg wrote a report describing the failure as an unforeseen mechanical event. Ethan read that report in the break room and said nothing. The hydraulic issue in line 3 had been building for about 3 weeks. It was subtle. A pressure variance of about 8% in the primary drive system cycling in a pattern that suggested a slow seal failure. The kind of thing that only showed up if you were looking at the raw data rather than the summary dashboard. And Ethan was always looking at the raw data because that was where the truth lived. He had flagged it in the system on a Tuesday. On Thursday, the system showed his flag had been reviewed. No action taken. He flagged it again the following Monday with a more detailed note. Seal failure in primary hydraulic drive, projected to reach critical threshold within 10 to 14 days. Recommend immediate inspection and replacement of drive seals. Estimated cost: $8,000 to $12,000. Estimated cost of line failure and repair: $200,000 to $400,000 plus downtime. The flag was reviewed. No action taken. On Wednesday morning, the morning everything changed. Ethan walked into the Line 3 equipment bay at 6:15 a.m. and put his hand on the drive housing and felt what he needed to feel. A warmth that shouldn't be there, and a vibration frequency that had shifted measurably from 2 days ago. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the housing and did the math in his head. It wasn't 10 to 14 days anymore, it was closer to 3. He found Greg in the main corridor at 7:30, just as the morning shift was filling in and the facility was coming alive with the particular noise of a large operation waking up. "I need 5 minutes," Ethan said. Greg glanced at him with the expression he reserved for interruptions, a kind of controlled impatience, politely packaged. "I've got a call at 8, he said. "Walk with me." Ethan walked with him. "Line 3 hydraulics," Ethan said. "I flagged this twice. I went back this morning and ran a manual check. The vibration signature has changed. We've had a measurable shift in the frequency pattern in 48 hours. That's not a slow deterioration anymore. That's acceleration. We're looking at a 3-day window, maybe less, before that drive seizes." Greg kept walking. "I saw your flags. And my assessment is that we're not at a critical threshold yet. The production schedule this week is..." "Greg." Ethan stopped walking. He almost never interrupted. He never stopped walking. He was aware that both of those things would register. If that line goes down mid-production run, we're not talking about a repair. We're talking about a hydraulic failure under load. That's a safety issue. That's not just equipment damage. Greg stopped too. He turned and looked at Ethan with an expression that Ethan had seen before, the expression of a man who is being made uncomfortable by someone who is right, and who resents both the discomfort and the rightness in equal measure. "I appreciate your concern," Greg said. "I'm not asking you to appreciate it," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to act on it." The corridor was busy around them. Several workers moved past without looking at them, though Ethan could tell some were listening. Greg's jaw tightened slightly. "We'll get to it end of week," he said. "Schedule it for Friday. That's my decision." "That's too..." "Ethan." Greg's voice went quiet and precise. "You maintain the equipment. I manage the operation. That's how this works. I'll see you at the morning briefing." He walked away. Ethan stood in the corridor and breathed. The morning briefing was held at 8:00 a.m. in the main operations room, a standing meeting, usually 20 minutes, covering production targets and daily priorities. Ethan attended because his team attended, and because he had learned long ago that being present was the only way to stay informed about decisions that affected his work. Greg ran the briefing with his customary efficiency. Numbers, targets, schedule updates. He had a particular gift for making the presentation of information feel like the execution of it, for making people in the room feel like the organization was running well, because Greg was explaining it clearly. Ethan sat in the back and said nothing for 17 minutes. Then Greg mentioned Line 3. "We've got good production momentum on Line 3, Greg said, pointing to the numbers on the board. "Management is happy with output. We want to maintain that pace through end of week." Ethan raised his hand. Greg looked at him. Something moved through his expression, quick, controlled, gone. "Ethan, I want to note for the record," Ethan said, keeping his voice level, "that I've submitted 2 documented flags indicating a hydraulic drive issue on Line 3. Both have been reviewed, and no maintenance action has been scheduled. I've done a manual check this morning, and the failure progression has accelerated. I want to ask formally that we schedule an inspection and repair before end of day today." The room was quiet. 17 people in that room, and every one of them understood what was happening. Greg set down his marker. "We've discussed this," Greg said, still controlled. "We have," Ethan agreed. "I'm raising it here because I want it documented that the concern was raised formally in front of witnesses, and that I'm recommending immediate action." 2 seconds of silence. "Thank you, Ethan," Greg said in the tone that ended things. "We'll address it per the schedule. Anything else?" Nobody had anything else. Ethan didn't wait for Friday. He couldn't. At 5:15 p.m. after the day shift had ended and the skeleton evening crew was running reduced operations, Ethan took his team. Danny, who was 26 and had learned more about hydraulic systems from Ethan than from any course he'd ever taken, and Marcus, who was 51 and had been doing this work since before Ethan arrived and knew a bad seal failure when someone described one and they shut down line 3 for maintenance. "We authorized to do this?" Danny asked, pulling on gloves. "I'm authorizing it," Ethan said. Danny looked at Marcus. Marcus shrugged in the way of a man who had seen this particular situation before and understood which side of it he wanted to be on. They worked for 3 hours. The seal condition was worse than even Ethan's updated assessment had indicated. The primary drive seal had deteriorated to approximately 30% structural integrity. Under the kind of load the line would have been running, Friday morning. Catastrophic failure was not a possibility, it was a certainty. When Danny pulled the seal out and held it under the work light, he looked at Ethan with an expression that was part shock and part something close to reverence. "If this had gone under load," Danny said. "I know," Ethan said. "Someone could have been hurt." "I know." They replaced the seals. They ran a pressure test. They cleared the line for operation. At 8:40 p.m., Ethan logged the completed repair in the system, documented the condition of the removed components with photographs, and went home. He did not tell Greg. He figured he would in the morning. The morning came differently than he expected. He was late. Not his fault. Mia had woken up with a stomachache at 6:30 a.m., the kind that was bad enough to require judgment about whether it warranted calling the school sitting with her through 15 minutes of uncertainty and a glass of water, and her quietly deciding she was okay before Ethan could get her settled and back on track and himself out the door. He arrived at Riverside at 8:23 a.m. The morning briefing had started at 8. He was 23 minutes late. He knew as he walked in the door that this was going to be used against him. He felt it the way you feel. Weather changing, not in any particular sign, but in the atmosphere itself, in some quality of the air that told you something was already in motion. Greg was waiting for him in the main corridor. Not at his desk. Not in a conference room. In the corridor, which meant he'd positioned himself to intercept, which meant this was intentional. "My office," Greg said. The office was small and clean. Greg sat across the desk. He had a folder thin, but the presence of a folder at all was never a good sign. "You were late this morning," Greg said. "My daughter had a medical situation," Ethan said. "I texted the team. Operations weren't affected." "You missed the morning briefing." "I missed the first 20 minutes of the morning briefing." Greg opened the folder. "You also took line 3 offline last night without authorization." Ethan held his breath for exactly 1 second. Then he let it go. "I had 2 documented flags that were not acted upon," Ethan said. "I conducted a manual inspection and determined the failure risk had accelerated to a point where I wasn't willing to wait for Friday. I shut down the line, replaced the drive seals, which were at approximately 30% structural integrity. Greg, which I documented with photographs, ran a pressure test and cleared the line. Line 3 is running this morning because of what my team did last night. If it had run through Friday, it would have failed under load. People could have been hurt." Greg looked at him for a long moment. "You don't have authorization to shut down production lines," Greg said. "I have authorization to take equipment offline when there's a safety concern," Ethan said. "That's in the Maintenance Operations Protocol Section 4, Paragraph 2. "That clause applies to imminent visible dangers," Greg said, "not to your interpretations of sensor data. The removed seal is in a bag in the maintenance office with photographs of its condition. I'd invite any qualified engineer to review it and tell me whether that was a reasonable call." Greg closed the folder. "Ethan," he said in a voice that was almost gentle, which was somehow worse than hostility. "This isn't the first time we've had issues. You've had a pattern of going around the chain of command. You've had conflict with supervisory decisions. And now this." Ethan looked at him. "You're firing me," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. Greg didn't answer immediately. He straightened some papers that didn't need straightening. "I'm making a personnel decision that's in the best interest of the operation," he said. "Because I fixed a problem that you refused to fix. Because you acted outside your authority and created a pattern of insubordination that this company—" "Greg." Ethan's voice was quiet, completely quiet. "Look me in the eye and tell me that what I did last night was wrong." Silence. Greg looked at the desk. "HR will process your separation paperwork," he said. "You'll receive your final paycheck within the standard processing window. I'm going to need your access badge." Ethan reached into his pocket. He set the badge on Greg's desk. He stood up. He walked out of the office. He walked down the corridor. He had walked 1,000 times past the break room where he had eaten lunch 5 days a week for 11 years. Past the Line 3 bay where you could hear the machinery running clean and steady because of what he and Danny and Marcus had done the night before, and out through the main door into the cold autumn morning. He sat in his truck for a while. He wasn't sure how long. His phone showed 3 texts from Danny. "What happened? Is it true? Call me, man. Come on." He didn't answer. He drove to Mia's school because he was too early to pick her up and too unable to go anywhere else. He parked in the lot and sat there, and after a while, the morning PE class came out onto the field, a small crowd of second graders in the November cold, and he watched them run around for several minutes without registering any of it. 11 years. Every flag he'd filed. Every repair he'd caught before it became a disaster. Every late night in the equipment bay. Every time he'd stayed an extra hour, 2 hours, 3, because the work needed doing, and he was the one who could do it. Every time he'd sat in a meeting and held his tongue when Greg was wrong, and the times like this morning when he hadn't held his tongue when it had mattered too much not to speak. He thought about the seal he'd pulled from Line 3, 30% structural integrity. He thought about the people who would have been standing near that line on Friday morning. He thought, "I would do it again." And he thought, "That's probably the problem." He picked up Mia at 3:15. She came out of school with her backpack bouncing and her hair coming loose from the braids he'd done that morning, talking before she even reached the truck. "And we did an experiment with vinegar and baking soda. And Mrs. Peterson said mine was the best reaction because I added more baking soda than anyone else, and she said that shows scientific thinking." She climbed in. She buckled her seatbelt. She looked at him. "Dad," she said. "What's wrong?" Not a question. 7 years old, and she had her mother's gift for reading rooms, reading faces, reading the things that weren't being said. "Nothing's wrong," Ethan said. She studied him for 3 more seconds with large, serious eyes. "Okay," she said in the tone of someone who was filing the information away for later. He drove. The plan had been to take her home, make dinner, help with homework. Normal. Routine. The architecture of a life that didn't have room for what had happened today. He'd figure out the job situation tomorrow. He had some savings, not much but some. He'd figure it out. Outside the sky was turning. Not the normal early November gray, but something heavier, a front moving in from the northwest that the weather apps had been predicting all week. By the time they hit the highway, the first rain was starting, not hard yet, just a mist, the tentative beginning of something larger. "Can we have soup?" Mia asked from the back seat. "We can have soup." "The good kind with the little pasta." "The little pasta kind, yes." She went quiet again, looking out her window at the gray sky and the wet highway and the long lines of cars around them. Ethan merged onto Route 40 East, the fastest route home. The rain picked up. He turned the wipers on and watched the road and thought about nothing because there was too much to think about, and he hadn't figured out the shape of it yet. That was when he heard it. Not a crash exactly. The sound was more complex than that. A series of sounds rapid and overlapping: the shriek of tires, the crumple of impact, the crash of a guardrail giving way, and then a sound that was lower and somehow worse than all of the others. The sound of something heavy rolling. It happened ahead and to the right in the space of maybe 2 seconds, and then there was the orange glow. Ethan braked. Every car around him braked. Ahead, maybe 60 yards off the road in the ditch, A black luxury SUV was upside down and on fire. He was parked on the shoulder before he'd consciously decided to park. He was looking in the rearview mirror at Mia, eyes wide awake, now looking at the glow ahead. "Dad, what?" "Mia." His voice was calm. He was surprised by how calm it was. "I need you to stay in this car. Doors locked. Do not open them for anyone except me. Do you understand me?" "What are you doing?" "There's someone who needs help. I'm going to help them. You're going to stay right here and lock the door and not open it until I come back. Say it back to me." She looked at him, at the fire ahead, at him again. "Stay in the car," she said quietly. "Lock the door. Don't open it." "Good girl." He was out the door before she finished the sentence. The rain was heavy now, coming sideways in the wind, and the cold hit him immediately. His jacket was thin, and he hadn't grabbed his heavier one this morning. He ran along the shoulder past stopped cars, past people who had gotten out of their vehicles and were standing in the rain, watching the burning wreck and doing nothing. He passed a man in a construction jacket who was on his phone. He passed a woman holding her own arms, staring. He passed a pickup truck where someone had their hazard lights on and their windows up. He ran. The ditch was about 8 feet deep, and the SUV had rolled and come to rest on its roof, the driver's side partially crumpled from the impact with the guardrail. The fire was in the engine compartment, but had started spreading. He could see it reflecting in the wet grass, moving slowly, but moving. He could smell it. He could feel the heat even in the rain. He went down the ditch bank without slowing. There was a woman inside. He could see her through the shattered windshield. She was suspended upside down by her seatbelt, unconscious, blood on her face, not moving, but breathing visibly. The driver's door was crumpled. The passenger door was blocked by a section of guardrail that had come through with the vehicle. Ethan moved around the car, reading it the way he read failing equipment, looking for the structural logic, looking for where the integrity was, where the weakness was, where you could apply force without making things worse. The rear passenger window was shattered, but the rear door itself was intact. He grabbed the door handle, pulled. The door groaned, but didn't open. The frame had warped slightly in the roll, the kind of distortion that wouldn't be obvious visually, but would bind the door mechanically. He repositioned, got both hands on the door, put his foot against the quarter panel for leverage, and pulled with everything he had. The door opened. Heat rushed out. I was inside, immediately reaching across to where the woman hung from her seatbelt. He found the release mechanism, by feel supported her weight with his other arm, and freed her from the belt in one motion. She was heavier than she looked, solid, not slight, and he had to work to control the descent to keep her from dropping hard onto the crumpled roof that was now the floor. He got her out. He dragged her up the ditch bank, arms under her arms, moving backwards through the wet grass, moving away from the car, away from the heat, which was increasing. Now he could feel it on his face, on his hands, even in the rain. He got her 30 feet from the car. He set her down in the grass. He checked her breathing, checked her pulse at her throat. Both present, both adequate. He kept her still. He didn't know what her injuries were, didn't know if she had spinal involvement, and he wasn't going to risk moving her more than he'd already had to. Behind him, the SUV's engine compartment went fully over. The fire bloomed. Ethan put his body between it and the woman and waited. The sirens were already coming. He stayed until the first paramedic reached them, maybe 4 minutes, that felt like 40. He answered the paramedic's rapid questions. "I pulled her from the vehicle. She was unconscious and suspended by her seatbelt. I maintained her spine as well as I could during the extraction. She's been breathing consistently. No visible trauma below the shoulder." The paramedic nodded and was already working. Ethan stood up. He looked back at the burning car. He looked down at the woman, unconscious, pale alive. He didn't know her name. It didn't matter to him at that moment. He climbed back up the ditch bank. He walked back along the shoulder to his truck where Mia was sitting with her face pressed against the window watching. He got in. The doors unlocked. "Dad," Mia said. Her voice was very small. "Is she okay?" He looked at his hands. Wet. Dirty. A cut on his left palm he hadn't noticed getting. "I think so," he said. "You're bleeding." "It's small." Mia was quiet for a moment. Then, "Were you scared?" Ethan thought about the question. He thought about the heat and the warped door and the woman hanging upside down in a burning car. He thought about the moment he'd looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror and then gotten out anyway. "Yeah," he said. "I was." "But you went anyway." "Yeah," he said. "I went anyway." She was quiet again. Outside, the emergency lights were casting red and blue across the wet highway, the rain still falling, the night coming down around them. "I'm glad you're back," she said. He reached back and held her hand for a moment. Then he started the truck. He drove home. Haimada souped the kind with the little pasta, and helped with homework, and ran a bath, and read half a chapter of the book they were working through together, and he did not think about what had happened on the highway, or what had happened at Riverside that morning, or what any of it meant for tomorrow. Tomorrow would require something from him. He'd figure out what when he got there. He turned off Mia's lamp and stood in the doorway and watched her sleep for a while, small safe, her chest rising and falling, completely untroubled by the day. I went anyway. He went to bed. He didn't know that across the city in a hospital room, the woman he had pulled from a burning car was regaining consciousness. He didn't know that her name was Sophia Bennett. He didn't know that she was already asking questions. He didn't know that the answers would lead back to him. I didn't know that by tomorrow morning, nothing in his life would be the same. He slept. The hospital room was quiet at 2:47 in the morning. Quiet the way hospitals are always quiet at that hour. Not peaceful, but suspended, like the building itself was holding its breath between crises. The monitors beeped in their steady, indifferent rhythm. The IV drip moved in slow, precise increments. And Sophia Bennett opened her eyes. She didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She lay still for several seconds, taking inventory the way a person does when they wake up somewhere unfamiliar and instinctively understand that sudden movement is a mistake. Ceiling tiles. Fluorescent light turned down low. The smell of antiseptic and recycled air. A blood pressure cuff on her left arm. Her right hand, when she tried to move it, sent a sharp complaint up through her shoulder that told her something had happened to it. She remembered the rain. She remembered the truck that came across the median. Not a clear memory, more like a series of photographs, disconnected and out of order. The headlights. The sound. The world tilting sideways with a violence that her brain had apparently decided not to fully process in real time. And then nothing until now. She turned her head carefully. Her assistant. Rachel was asleep in the chair by the window, or had been asleep, because the moment Sophia moved, Rachel's eyes opened. 28 years old, sharp as a tack, and apparently capable of sleeping at a 45-degree angle in a hospital chair without losing her ability to come fully awake in under 2 seconds. "You're up," Rachel said, already reaching for her phone. "Don't call anyone yet," Sophia said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. "Water first." Rachel poured water. Sophia drank. The simple act of swallowing required more concentration than it should have. "What time is it?" Sophia said. "Almost 3. "How long was I out?" "They brought you in around 9:30. You were conscious briefly in the ER. You don't remember that?" "No." "You told the paramedic your name, your blood type, and your attorney's phone number," Rachel said. "In that order." Despite everything, Sophia almost smiled. "Good priorities. You have a concussion, 2 cracked ribs, a partially torn rotator cuff, and about 40 different bruises," Rachel said. "The doctor will be in at 6. They want to keep you another day for observation." Sophia was already processing, already moving past the physical inventory into the questions that mattered more to her. The car. Total loss. The other driver. Rachel's expression shifted. He didn't make it. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She closed her eyes, not from pain, but from something heavier. A stranger was dead because the road had been wet, and the physics had been what they were, and there was nothing to be done about that now, except carry it. "How did I get out?" she asked. Rachel paused. "What do you mean?" "The car flipped Rachel. I was inside it. I didn't get myself out. So who got me out?" Rachel reached for her phone. "The police report says a bystander pulled you from the vehicle before the fire reached the cabin." They got a statement from him at the scene. He left before anyone got his information fully. Play it, Sophia said. The body cam footage from the first officer on scene. It's in the report. I can... Play it, Sophia said again. Rachel found the file. She held the phone where Sophia could see it. The footage was grainy, rain-streaked, the kind of video that captures chaos without making it legible. But Sophia watched it with the focused attention of someone who had spent 20 years making high-stakes decisions based on incomplete information. She watched a figure come down the ditch bank at a run, not hesitating, not slowing, going straight toward the burning car. She watched him work the door, not panicked, methodical repositioning when the first attempt didn't work, trying again. She watched him go inside. She watched him come back out with her. She watched him carry her up the ditch bank. She watched him stay with her, his body between her and the fire until the paramedics arrived. She watched him stand up, say something to the paramedic and walk away. Just walk away. Up the bank. Along the shoulder. Back toward the line of stopped cars. The footage ended. Sophia handed the phone back to Rachel. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Find him, she said. I've already started, Rachel said. The officer got a partial plate. We have... I don't mean track down his address and send him flowers, Sophia said. I mean find out who he is, everything. Where he works, what he does, why he was on that road, everything. Rachel nodded. She was already typing. One more thing, Sophia said. What? He had a child in the car. Rachel stopped typing. She looked up. There was a child in one of those stopped cars, Sophia said. I could see the car seats. I could see a small face in the back window of a truck on the shoulder watching, and then he came from that direction. He left a child in a car and ran toward a fire to pull me out. She let that sit for a moment. I want to know who he is, Rachel. I want to know everything. Rachel looked at her for a second longer than a purely professional exchange would require. Okay, she said quietly. I'll get you everything. Sophia closed her eyes again. She did not sleep. She lay in the hospital bed and listened to the monitors and thought about a man she didn't know who had run toward a burning car while his child was waiting, and she turned the image over in her mind, the way you turn something over when it doesn't quite fit the shape of the world as you understand it. Most people stopped. She had spent enough time in the world, had seen enough of human nature under pressure to know that most people stopped. Not because they were bad people, because stopping felt safe and moving felt terrifying, and the brain will almost always choose the option that feels like survival. This man had not stopped. She wanted to know why. She thought she already knew the answer. She wanted to be sure. By 4 a.m., Rachel had a name. By 5 a.m., Rachel had a file. By 6 a.m. When the doctor came in for morning rounds, Sophia had read everything twice and made 3 phone calls and was already thinking 2 moves ahead with the focus and precision that had built Bennett Global Holdings from a $200,000 seed investment into one of the fastest-growing acquisition firms in the country. The doctor told her she needed rest. She thanked him politely and asked if she could have more coffee. He looked at the expression on her face and decided not to argue. Ethan Walker woke up at 5:47 a.m. and had no idea any of this was happening. Hi-Mod coffee. He stood at the kitchen window. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of November morning that doesn't offer anything in the way of encouragement, just the flat gray fact of another day requiring navigation. His left palm had a bandage on it from the cut he'd gotten on the doorframe of the SUV, and his right shoulder ached in a way that told him he'd pulled something dragging a full-grown adult up a ditch bank in the rain. Nothing serious. The kind of pain that reminded you that you'd done something real with your body. Hi-Mod, Mia's lunch. He made her cereal, the good kind, the one with the little marshmallows that he normally restricted to weekends, but had decided without examining the decision too carefully was appropriate for today. He heard her feet on the stairs. She came into the kitchen and looked at the cereal and then looked at him. The good kind on a Thursday, she said. Special circumstances, he said. She sat down. She ate. She watched him with the careful attention of a 7-year-old who has learned that when her father says, special circumstances, He usually means something happened that he isn't fully explaining. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked. "I'm good," he said. "Your hand is bandaged." "Small cut. It's fine." She ate another spoonful. "Is it because of the lady in the car?" "Partly," he said. "And partly because I've got some things to figure out today. But none of it is something for you to worry about." "I'm not worried," she said in a tone that sounded exactly like Claire, his wife, her mother 7 years gone. The specific tone Claire used when she absolutely was worried, but had decided that saying so wouldn't help anything. He drove Mia to school. He hugged her at the drop-off door. She went in without looking back. She was at the age where looking back at the drop-off door was not something you did, and Ethan sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with the truck running. 11 years. He was 36 years old, and he had no job, about 4 months of savings, if he was careful, a daughter in 2nd grade, and a left hand that ached where he'd cut it on the doorframe of a stranger's car. He thought about calling Danny to find out what the atmosphere was like at Riverside this morning, whether the Line 3 repair had been noticed, whether anyone was asking questions. He thought about calling his brother in Cincinnati, who had offered him a position twice in the last 3 years, and who would not say "I told you so," but whose silence on the subject would be louder than words. He thought about a lot of things. Then his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. Columbus area code, but not a number in his contacts. He almost let it go to voicemail. But he had the particular instinct of a parent, the reflex that made him answer unknown numbers because Mia's school sometimes called from different extensions. He answered. "Is this Ethan Walker?" The voice was a woman's, professional, efficient, not unkind, but clearly accustomed to getting to the point. "It is," he said. "My name is Rachel Chen. I'm calling on behalf of Sophia Bennett. Ms. Bennett would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Are you available this morning?" Ethan sat with that for a moment. "I don't know a Sophia Bennett," he said. A brief pause. "Ms. Bennett was the driver of the vehicle on Route 40 last night," Rachel said. "The accident." I understood. He felt something move through him that wasn't quite surprise, more like the recognition of something that had always been a possibility, but that he hadn't examined. "Is she all right?" he asked. "She's recovering well," Rachel said. "She's asking to meet with you, in person if possible. She's at Columbus Regional. We can send a car if—" "I can drive myself," Ethan said. "Of course. When would—" "I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. He drove. I wasn't sure what he expected. Some version of a grateful stranger, he supposed. Someone who wanted to say thank you in person, which he would receive politely and then deflect because he hadn't done it for gratitude. And gratitude made him uncomfortable in the specific way it makes people uncomfortable when they're being thanked for something they would do again, without hesitation. The thanks implying a sacrifice that in the moment hadn't felt like sacrifice at all. What he didn't expect was Sophia Bennett. The hospital room was on the 4th floor. A woman he assumed was Rachel met him at the elevator and walked him down the corridor without making small talk, which he appreciated. She knocked once on the door of room 412, opened it, and stepped back. Ethan went in. The woman in the hospital bed was sitting up, not lying down. She had the composed posture of someone who had decided that lying flat was a kind of surrender she wasn't willing to make, despite the visible evidence of the last 12 hours on her face, the bruising along her left cheekbone, the careful way she held her shoulder, the faint shadows under her eyes from a night with no real sleep. She was older than he'd expected, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair and eyes that were very direct and very awake. She looked at him the way people look at something they've been thinking about for hours and are now finally seeing in 3 dimensions. "Ethan Walker," she said. "Ms. Bennett," he said. "Sit down, please." He sat. The chair was beside the bed, the kind of chair that hospital rooms provide for people who are keeping vigil, and there was something slightly awkward about occupying it as a stranger. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Physically. Cracked ribs, concussion, torn rotator cuff," she said with the brisk efficiency of someone reading a list they've already memorized. "I'll recover. More importantly—" She stopped. The directness in her eyes shifted into something less controlled just for a moment. "More importantly, I am alive. Because of you." Ethan said nothing. I watched the body cam footage, she said. 3 times. I watched you come down that bank and go straight to that car without breaking stride. I watched you work that door. I watched you come in after me. She paused. I want to understand something. Okay, he said. You had a child in your car. It wasn't a question. He answered it anyway. My daughter, she's 7. She was in the back seat. She was. And you left her there in a car on the shoulder of a highway in a rainstorm to run toward a burning vehicle. Sophia's voice was not accusatory. It was something more like wonder carefully controlled. Most people didn't move. I've talked to the responding officers. There were 30 or 40 cars stopped on that road and nobody moved. You moved. Someone needed help, Ethan said. Yes, she said. But that's not actually an explanation. That's a description of the situation. I'm asking about you. I'm asking why you moved when no one else did. He thought about it genuinely, because the question deserved a genuine answer. Because I could, he said finally. I knew how to read the car. I've worked with structural mechanics my whole career. I could see what needed to be done. When you know you can do something and you don't do it. He stopped. That's not a thing I'm capable of. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Rachel found your employment file, she said. He went still. I know you were fired yesterday morning, she said. I know what you were fired for. She reached for a folder on the bedside table, opened it with her good arm. I know about the hydraulic flags you submitted. I know about the repair you performed after hours. I know that the seal you pulled from line 3 was at 30% structural integrity. That's in your maintenance log, along with photographs. She looked up. You fixed a problem that could have hurt people, and they fired you for it. The room was quiet. It was my call to make, Ethan said. I made it. You made it at personal cost, Sophia said. Significant personal cost. The same way you made the call last night. She set the folder down. Those aren't coincidences, Mr. Walker. Those are character. He didn't know what to say to that. He looked at the floor. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I want you to understand the context for what I'm going to say next, Sophia said. I've been considering an acquisition, Riverside Industrial Solutions. It's been on my desk for about 4 months. The company has been underperforming relative to its asset value. Its management has been making decisions that prioritize short-term optics over long-term operational health. And there are specific structural and personnel issues that my team has flagged as contributors to the decline. She paused. What I didn't know 4 months ago was the specific shape of those personnel issues. Ethan looked up. I made a decision this morning, Sophia said. At approximately 5:45 a.m., Bennett Global Holdings is acquiring Riverside Industrial Solutions. The room went very quiet. I thought you should know, she said, because I'm going to be making significant changes to how that company operates, and I'd like to discuss your role in those changes. He stared at her. My role. I'm going to need a director of operations and engineering development, she said. Someone who understands the operational systems from the inside. Someone who has demonstrated the ability to identify problems that management has missed, to act on those problems under pressure to protect people, even when it costs them personally. She held his gaze. I think you know I'm not describing a hypothetical candidate. Ethan sat back slowly. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. I'm going to stop you, he said, before you finish that thought. Sophia raised an eyebrow. I didn't pull you out of that car to get anything, he said. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want a reward. I did what I did because I would have done it for anyone. I'm not comfortable with the idea that one moment on a highway is the reason for... It's not, Sophia said. He stopped. That's what I'm trying to explain to you, she said. The moment on the highway told me who you were. The 11 years at Riverside told me what you can do. Those are different things. I'm not offering you a position because you saved my life. I'm offering you a position because the rescue revealed a person who was already there, already real, already wasted in a role that couldn't contain what he was capable of. Silence. The rescue didn't create you, she said quietly. It just made you visible. Ethan looked at his hand, the bandaged left palm, the right hand that still ached from the ditch bank. He thought about Greg's office, the thin folder. You don't have authorization. He thought about 11 years of flags filed and ignored. 11 years of problems solved without credit. 11 years of holding a company together while the people above him convinced themselves they were the ones doing it. He thought about Mia's face in the truck window, watching him walk back from the fire. "I have a condition," he said. Sophia waited. "My daughter comes first," he said. "That's not negotiable. It's never been negotiable, and it won't be. Whatever schedule, whatever expectations, she's the priority. If those two things come into conflict, she wins. Every time." Something moved across Sophia's face that wasn't quite a smile, but was close to one. "I'm going to tell you something about how I run my companies," she said. "I don't measure people by the hours they're visible. I measure them by what they accomplish. I don't believe in performative presence, the idea that being at a desk means you're working, or that working means you're not a parent." She looked at him steadily. "I have a daughter of my own. She's 19 now. There were years when I wasn't as present as I should have been. I don't repeat mistakes." She paused. "So yes, Mia comes first. That's not a condition I'm accepting. It's a principle I already hold." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "I need to think," he said. "Of course you do," Sophia said. "But I want you to think about something specific while you're thinking." She picked up the folder again, held it out to him. "Read this before you decide. Not the maintenance logs, you already know those. Read the section on the back." He took the folder. On the back page was a printed document. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. Then he understood. It was an internal analysis his team had compiled over the previous 18 months. Equipment reliability data failure, prevention records, cost savings attributable to early intervention. The kind of analysis that Riverside's management had never commissioned, because commissioning it would have required acknowledging that the answers mattered. The number at the bottom of the page was $847,000. That was the estimated cost savings attributable to Ethan's department over 18 months in equipment failures prevented before they reached critical stage. $847,000. The company that had fired him for arriving 23 minutes late had quietly pocketed nearly $1 million in prevented losses and had never once said his name out loud in connection with that number. He sat with the folder in his hands for a long moment. "How did you get this?" he asked. "My analysts are very thorough," Sophia said. "They had it by 7 this morning." "Your analysts put this together in 2 hours," she said, "which tells you something about how long it should have taken Riverside's management to see it. They had 18 months and never looked." She let that land. "That's what I mean when I say the problem wasn't you. The problem was a company that stopped looking at the right things." He set the folder down carefully. He stood up. "I'll give you an answer by tomorrow," he said. "That's fine." He started toward the door. Then he stopped, turned back. "Ms. Bennett?" She looked at him. "I'm glad you made it," he said. It was simple. It was entirely genuine. It was the statement of a man who had no agenda around it, who was simply telling the truth. Sophia held his gaze. "So am I," she said. "For more reasons than you currently understand." He left. In the elevator, he stood with his hands in his pockets and stared at the floor numbers changing and thought about all of it. The folder, the number at the bottom of the page. The look on Sophia Bennett's face when she said the rescue didn't create you. It made you visible, and he felt something happening in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Something that was not quite hope, because hope had been burned out of him incrementally over 11 years of being overlooked, but was perhaps the thing that lived right next to hope. The thing that said pay attention, because something is shifting. He drove to Mia's school and sat in the parking lot until 3:15. He thought. He didn't have all the answers. He wasn't sure he trusted the situation entirely, not because he doubted Sophia's sincerity, but because he had learned through experience that sincerity and outcome were not the same thing. People could mean what they said and still deliver something different. Institutions could have good intentions at the top and bad ones in the infrastructure. But he kept coming back to one thing: $847,000. That was what he had contributed, verifiably documented in a 2-hour analysis over 18 months. And not one person at Riverside had ever said his name in connection with it. Not one meeting, not one review, not one conversation in a corridor. 11 years of that. 11 years of holding things together, while the people above him collected the credit and the bonuses and the quarterly presentations where they congratulated themselves on their operational efficiency. He thought about Mia. He thought about what he wanted her to understand about work, about value, about the relationship between what you give and what you receive. He thought about what it meant to be teaching her by example that the right response to being undervalued was to stay quiet and keep showing up. He thought about what it would mean to show her something different. His phone buzzed. A text from Danny Bro. They're saying Bennett Global is acquiring Riverside. Is that real? Did you hear anything? Then another 30 seconds later. Also, everyone is asking about the Line 3 repair. Greg is telling people he authorized it, just so you know. Ethan stared at the second text for a long moment. Then he put his phone face down on the passenger seat. Mia came out at 3:15 with her backpack bouncing and her hair loose from the morning braids and a piece of paper she was clearly excited to show him before she'd even reached the truck. "Dad," she said, climbing in and thrusting the paper at him. "Look, I got 100. He took the paper. A math worksheet. Every problem correct. At the top, her teacher had written, "Outstanding work, Mia," with a small star. He looked at her. "That's my girl," he said. She buckled her seatbelt, already moving on to the next thing. "Can we have soup?" "We can have soup." "The little pasta kind." "The little pasta kind," he said. He drove. That evening after dinner, after homework, after the bath and the book and the lamp turned off, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his phone and the quiet of a house where a child was sleeping. He opened a new document on his phone and stared at it for a while. Then he started writing. Not a resume. He had a resume. What he wrote was something closer to a reckoning, a list of everything he had done at Riverside that had mattered, that had cost him something, that had been absorbed by the institution without acknowledgement. He wrote it not for Sophia Bennett, not for the negotiation, but for himself. Because he needed to see it in one place. He needed to look at it and understand what 11 years had actually contained. It took him 2 hours. When he was done, he sat back and read through it. The hydraulic systems. The bearing failures he'd caught before they propagated. The Line 3 repair. The dozen smaller interventions over the years, each one documented in maintenance logs that nobody had ever reviewed with the intention of understanding what they revealed. The people on his team that he'd trained, that he'd covered for, that he'd protected from Greg's particular brand of management. Danny, who now knew more about industrial hydraulics than most engineers twice his age. Marcus, who had finally been treated like the experienced professional he was, rather than a body filling a shift slot. He had built something at Riverside. Not what he could have built. Not what he had once had the trajectory to build. But something real. Something that mattered to the people who worked beside him. And the company had fired him for arriving 23 minutes late on a morning when his daughter had a stomachache. He closed the document. He picked up his phone and found Rachel Chen's number, which she had texted him after the hospital visit with a polite message saying she was available if he had any questions. He typed, "Tell Ms. Bennett, I'll take the meeting tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. works, if that works for her." The reply came back in under a minute. 8 a.m. confirmed. She'll be ready. He set his phone down. He sat in the kitchen for a while longer, listening to the sound of the house around him. The refrigerator's quiet hum, the occasional tick of the heater, the absolute stillness of Mia asleep upstairs. He didn't know exactly what was coming. He didn't know how the meeting tomorrow would go, didn't know whether what Sophia Bennett was describing would turn out to be real in the way she intended. It didn't know whether he was walking into something genuine or into another version of the same mistake he'd made 11 years ago when he'd traded ambition for stability and ended up with neither. What he knew was this. The woman in that hospital bed had looked at the same facts Greg Holloway had looked at and reached a completely opposite conclusion. Greg had looked at Ethan's 11 years and seen a maintenance worker who didn't follow orders. Sophia had looked at the same 11 years and seen someone who had been running a quarter of the company's operational success from a title that didn't reflect it. Same facts, same record, completely different eyes. I thought about that for a long time. Then he went to bed. Across town, Sophia Bennett was not sleeping. She was on her third call of the night with her CFO, walking through the acquisition terms for Riverside, with the precision and speed of someone who had done this enough times to move fast, without cutting corners. The deal would be structured quickly. She wanted it closed before the end of the week, before Riverside's management had time to understand what was happening and start moving pieces around to protect themselves. The existing leadership team, her CFO said on the third call. Full retention, partial retention, or restructuring. Restructuring, Sophia said without hesitation. Across the board. There are people in the operational and technical staff who are excellent, she said. The maintenance team specifically. I want them retained and reviewed for advancement. The management layer, she paused. Greg Holloway is the operations director. Correct. He goes, she said. Brief silence. The legal exposure on that is manageable, she said. I want it clean and I want it documented. His performance record versus the operational outcomes during his tenure speaks for itself. We have the data. She thought of the folder. The number at the bottom of the page. We have more than enough data. And the new director of operations. I'm meeting with a candidate tomorrow morning, she said. Another brief silence. Her CFO had worked with her for 9 years and understood by now when a decision had already been made. I'll have the term sheet ready, he said. Thank you, David. She hung up. She sat in the hospital bed in the 3 a.m. quiet and pulled up one more time the body cam footage on her phone. She watched it again. The figure coming down the bank. The methodical work on the door. The entry into the burning car. The extraction. The long drag up the ditch bank. She watched him walk away. Just walk away. No hesitation in either direction toward the car or away from it. Just a man who saw what needed to be done, did it, and then went back to his daughter. She turned off her phone. She lay back carefully. The ribs made everything careful, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. She had built her company on a single principle. One she had developed in the years when she was nobody, when she was working 2 jobs and trying to get her first investment off the ground, and watching people with less competence and more access move past her in every direction. The principle was simple. The people who actually hold things together are almost never the people getting the credit. She had spent her career trying to find those people. She had never found one quite like this. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow we begin. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the rain and the highway and the terrible tilting of the world, she slept. The text had gone out at 7:52 a.m. Not a rumor. Not a whisper passed between 2 people in a break room. An actual calendar invite sent from Riverside's executive assistant to every member of the leadership team, marked urgent, requesting immediate attendance in the main conference room at 9 a.m. sharp. No agenda listed, no explanation given. Just the time, the room, and the word urgent sitting there in the subject line like a stone dropped in still water. By 8:15, Greg Holloway had called 3 people to ask if they knew what it was about. Nobody knew. By 8:30, he had convinced himself it was about the quarterly numbers, which were slightly behind projection, but not catastrophically so, and had spent 20 minutes preparing talking points in his office with the focused energy of a man who believed that being prepared was the same thing as being protected. He was wrong about both. Danny texted Ethan at 8:17. Something's happening. Big meeting called. Nobody knows what it is. Greg looks like he swallowed something wrong. Ethan read the text sitting in the parking structure of Columbus Regional Hospital 3 minutes early for his 8 a.m. meeting with Sophia Bennett. He read it twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket, got out of the truck, and went inside. Rachel met him at the elevator again. Same efficiency, same absence of small talk. The 4th floor corridor was busier than it had been the night before the hospital in its daytime mode, purposeful and moving. Room 412 was the same room. He knocked. He went in. Sophia was sitting up dressed now in the clothes Rachel had apparently brought from wherever she'd been staying. Dark slacks, a simple blouse, her arm in a sling that she wore with the contained irritation of someone who considered physical limitation a scheduling problem rather than a reason to slow down. She had a laptop open on the adjustable table beside the bed. Her coffee was on the other side. She looked like a person running a meeting from a hospital room because the meeting couldn't wait, which was exactly what was happening. "Good morning," she said. "Sit down." He sat. "Before we start," he said, "how are the ribs?" "They're ribs," she said. "They'll heal. I've had worse." She looked at him with the directness he was already starting to recognize as her baseline register. "Did you think about it?" "I did." "And?" "I have questions," he said. "Good," she said. "I'd be worried if you didn't." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, looking at her directly. "You said restructuring. When you said that yesterday, I heard it as a general term. I want to understand specifically what that means for the people who actually do the work at Riverside, not management, the floor team, the maintenance crew, the line workers." Sophia folded her hands in her lap. "What specifically are you asking?" "I'm asking whether this acquisition is about the assets or the people," he said. "Because if it's about the assets, the equipment, the contracts, the facility, then restructuring is a word that means layoffs, and I won't be part of building a process that ends up hurting the people I worked beside for 11 years. The room was quiet for a moment. "And if it's about the people," she said. "Then we have something to talk about," he said. Sophia held his gaze for 3 full seconds without blinking. Then she turned the laptop toward him. "Look at this." He looked. It was a slide clean, simple, the kind of internal presentation that wasn't designed for external audiences. The header read Riverside Industrial Solutions, Post-Acquisition Operational Plan Phase 1. He read it. He read it slowly because he was not a man who read important things quickly. He read it the way he read maintenance data, looking for the specific detail that told the real story. The thing that either confirmed the pattern or broke it. What he found confirmed it. The plan identified the maintenance and technical operations staff as the highest value human capital in the organization. It proposed a review of all operational staff, not for cuts, but for proper placement. People who had been underpaid relative to their actual contribution. People who had been held in titles that didn't reflect their responsibilities. A performance review structure built on outcomes, not on optics. A chain of communication that went from floor staff directly to operational leadership without filtering through management layers that had historically absorbed concerns without acting on them. And at the center of the organizational chart, a position titled Director of Operations and Engineering Development with a direct report line to the CEO. His name wasn't in that box yet, but it was the right shape for it. He could see that clearly. He looked up. "Who built this plan?" "My operations team, working from the data analysis they completed yesterday morning," Sophia said. "But the structural logic came from your maintenance logs, specifically from the pattern of how problems were being caught, escalated, ignored, and then resolved anyway by your team working around the management layer." She paused. "Your logs told a story. My team read it." He handed the laptop back. He sat for a moment. "One more question," he said. "Ask it." "Greg Holloway," he said. Sophia's expression didn't change. "What about him?" "He has people at Riverside who are loyal to him," Ethan said. "Not because he deserves it, but because that's how it works. People align themselves with whoever has the power, and he's had the power for 3 years. If I come back into that building with a new title, those people are going to be a problem. Not because they're bad people, because they're scared people, and scared people make noise." He looked at her. "I need to know how you're going to handle that." Sophia set down her coffee. "I'm going to walk into that building myself," she said. He hadn't expected that. "Today," she added. "You have 2 cracked ribs," he said. "I've attended board meetings with worse," she said with a finality that closed the subject completely. "I'm going to walk in there, and I'm going to handle it directly and publicly, because the only way to change a culture that's been running on hierarchy and fear is to dismantle the hierarchy publicly and replace it with something people can actually see." She looked at him. And I want you there when I do it. He understood what she was asking. He also understood what it would cost, walking back into that building. Not as the man who'd been fired, not quietly through a side entrance, but alongside the person who now owned the company, in front of everyone who had ever looked past him. That was not a small thing. "All right," he said. "All right, you'll take the position," she said. "All right, I'll be there today," he said. "The position I'll confirm in writing once I've reviewed the full terms." Sophia almost smiled. "Fair enough," she said. "Rachel will send the term sheet to whatever email you want to use. Review it, mark it up, send it back. We'll have it finalized by end of day." He stood. He offered his hand. She shook it carefully, given the shoulder. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan." She held his hand for just a half-second longer than a standard handshake. "Thank you. Not for the job. I think we're going to be able to be useful to each other, and that's a fair exchange. I mean for last night. For what you did on that road. I'm aware that there's no currency for it, and I'm aware you don't want one. But I needed to say it while it was just the two of us in a room." She let go of his hand. "So, thank you." He nodded once. He left. In the truck, he sat for 60 seconds doing nothing. Then he started the engine and drove. The Riverside Quarterly Leadership Meeting had been scheduled for 9 a.m., and by 9:03, every person with a director title or above was in the main conference room, which had the particular charged quality of a room full of people who all knew something was wrong and are performing the behavior of people who don't. Greg Holloway sat at the head of the table. He had his talking points. He had his posture, the studied ease of a man projecting confidence he did not entirely feel. He had his coffee. He had Ethan would later hear from Danny changed his tie twice that morning, which for Greg Holloway was the equivalent of a confession. The CFO was on the call from the Columbus office of Bennett Global's legal team, visible on the screen at the end of the room. The company's own CFO, Richard Marsh, was in his usual seat, looking at his phone in a way that suggested the information on his phone was not good. At 9:07, the conference room door opened. Sophia Bennett walked in. She was in the sling. She moved with the careful precision of a person managing pain without advertising it. She had Rachel beside her, and two other people that nobody in the room recognized, one of them carrying a briefcase, one of them carrying a laptop. She walked to the end of the table opposite Greg, and stood there and looked at every person in the room in turn slowly, without any particular expression on her face. Nobody spoke. Greg found his voice first. "Ms. Bennett," he said, and to his credit, it came out steadier than most people in his position would have managed. "We weren't informed you'd be attending in person." "No," Sophia agreed. "You weren't." She sat down. The person with the laptop opened it. Rachel set a folder on the table. "I'll be brief," Sophia said. Bennett Global Holdings closed the acquisition of Riverside Industrial Solutions at 8:45 this morning. The paperwork has been filed. The transaction is complete. This company is now a Bennett Global subsidiary effective immediately. She looked around the table. "I know this is fast. It's meant to be fast. Slow transitions give institutions time to protect the wrong things." The silence in the room had weight. Richard Marsh, the CFO, set his phone face down on the table. Slowly. The way a man sets something down when he understands that whatever comes next, holding his phone, won't help. "I want to show you something," Sophia said. The person with the laptop turned it to face the room. On the screen was a video, the body cam footage, the same footage Sophia had watched 3 times in the hospital room. The same rain, the same ditch, the same burning car. Greg frowned. "What is this?" "Watch," Sophia said. They watched. The room watched the footage in silence. Watched the figure come down the bank. Watched the methodical work on the door. Watched the extraction. Watched the figure carry someone up through the mud and the rain and set them down 30 feet from a car that was fully burning by the time he stepped back. When it ended, Sophia let the silence hold for a moment. "The man in that footage," she said, "is Ethan Walker, your former maintenance supervisor." She looked at Greg specifically when she said former. "He pulled me from that vehicle 2 nights ago. I am alive because of him." Greg's expression moved through several things, rapidly: recognition, calculation, and something that might have been the first genuine unease he'd shown all morning. "I want to tell you something else about Ethan Walker," Sophia said. She opened the folder Rachel had placed in front of her. In the 18 months prior to his termination, the maintenance team under his supervision prevented operational failures that would have cost this company conservatively $847,000 in equipment damage repair costs and production downtime. She set the first page aside. "That analysis took my team 2 hours to produce from your own maintenance logs. 2 hours." She looked down the table. "How long did it take your management team to produce it?" Nobody answered. "It didn't," she said. "No one ever ran this analysis. No one ever looked at the maintenance logs as a source of operational intelligence. No one ever sat down with the man who was generating this value and said, 'What are you seeing? What could we do better? What are you catching that we're missing?'" She closed the folder. Instead, she said, 12 hours after Ethan Walker performed the repair that prevented your Line 3 from catastrophic failure under load, a repair that protected every worker on that floor, he was called into an office and fired." The room was absolutely still. Greg opened his mouth. "I'd like you to wait," Sophia said without looking at him. She said it the way you say it to someone when you already know what they're going to say, and you've decided it doesn't apply to the current situation. Greg closed his mouth. "I want to be clear about something," Sophia said, looking around the table again. "I did not acquire this company because of Ethan Walker. I have been analyzing Riverside for 4 months. The acquisition was going to happen regardless of what occurred on that highway. What changed is my timeline and the specificity of my understanding of what is broken here." She paused. "And I'll tell you exactly what's broken. It's not the equipment. It's not the production numbers. It's a culture that learned to reward the appearance of management and ignore the substance of work. A culture that protected its hierarchy and punished anyone who threatened it, even when threatening it meant protecting other people." She looked at Greg now, directly, without blinking. "The decision to terminate Ethan Walker," she said, "was made by you." Greg sat up straighter. "That decision was made in accordance with company policy regarding insubordination," Sophia said. "Yes, I've read your documentation." He took a production line offline without authorization. He prevented a catastrophic hydraulic failure that would have caused significant equipment damage and potentially injured workers on your floor, Sophia said. He submitted 2 formal flags through your system that were reviewed and not acted upon. He raised the issue directly with you in your office the morning of the same day. He raised it again formally in the morning briefing in front of witnesses. And when you overruled him and scheduled the repair for Friday, 3 days after his assessment indicated imminent failure, he made the call on his own time with his own team to fix the problem. Greg's jaw was tight. He violated chain of command. He saved your company $400,000, Sophia said. Minimum. She held his gaze. You fired him the next morning and wrote his reason for arrival as personal issue not work-related, which is a creative way to describe a father dealing with his child's medical situation. Silence. I'm going to say this once, Sophia said. What I saw in that maintenance log and what I saw on that highway is the same thing. A person who identifies a problem assesses the risk accurately and acts to protect other people even when it costs him personally. That's not insubordination. That's exactly the capability this company has been sitting on top of and refusing to see. She sat back. That ends today. She nodded to Rachel. Rachel distributed a single page to each person at the table. Ethan would see it later, a clean 1-page summary of the immediate structural changes to Riverside's leadership. 3 names were removed from the organizational chart, effective immediately. Greg Holloway's was the first. Greg looked at the page. His face went through something that Ethan, who wasn't in the room but would hear about this in detail from Danny later that day, could have described in advance the specific sequence of a man who had spent his career believing that authority was a permanent condition rather than a contingent one, confronting the moment it stopped being either. You can't, Greg started. The acquisition is complete, Sophia said. The legal documentation is filed. Bennett Global has full authority over organizational structure, compensation, and personnel decisions, effective as of 8:45 this morning. She looked at him steadily. I can. And I did. Greg looked at the page, at the screen, at Sophia. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the room, including Later himself. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him. The room waited. All right, Sophia said. She looked at the remaining people at the table, not as threats, not as obstacles, but as pieces of an organization that was about to work differently. I want to talk about what comes next, because this isn't a punishment exercise. I don't buy companies to dismantle them. I buy companies to fix them. And fixing this one starts with understanding what's actually been working. She opened a second folder. Your Line 3 maintenance team, she said. Tell me about them. And for the first time in that room on that morning, someone asked the right question. Ethan was in the parking lot of an auto parts store 3 miles away on the phone with Mia's after-school program, confirming pickup arrangements, when his phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Meeting is running. Ms. Bennett would like you on site at Riverside by 11 a.m. if possible. He looked at his watch. It was 10:12. He texted back, I'll be there. He sat for a moment in the truck, engine off, and thought about what it meant to go back into that building. Not for a conversation, not for a meeting. As the person who now held the authority that Greg had used against him in the building where 11 years of his professional life had been systematically undervalued. He thought about it for 30 seconds. Then he started the engine and drove. Danny was waiting for him in the main corridor, which told Ethan that someone had tipped him off, probably Rachel, who had demonstrated an impressive operational awareness in the short time Ethan had known her. Danny was 26 and had been working under Ethan for 2 years, and had the look of someone who had watched the last 3 hours happen and was still processing the speed of it. Is it real? Danny said. It's real, Ethan said. She fired Greg. She made a personnel decision, Ethan said. Danny stared at him. Are you seriously? She made a personnel decision, Ethan said again, with a faint tone that Danny understood correctly, as meaning be careful about how we talk about this, because we are still in a corridor and people are listening. Danny lowered his voice. She fired Greg and 2 directors. People are losing their minds. Half the management floor is acting like there's a fire drill and nobody told them where the exits are. He paused. And someone said you're... He stopped. I'm what? Ethan said. Danny looked at him with an expression that was 1 part disbelief and 2 parts something that looked like complicated relief. Someone said you're the new director of operations. Ethan held his gaze. The paperwork isn't finalized yet. Danny closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. I knew it, he said quietly, not gloating. Something more like the satisfaction of a person who has held on to a truth nobody wanted to acknowledge for long enough that having it confirmed felt like putting something heavy down. I always said, don't, Ethan said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, Ethan said, and I hear it. But here's what I need from you right now today. I need you to be the same Danny who came in at 5 p.m. and helped me pull those seals on line 3 because it was the right thing to do. Not because of titles, not because of what's happening upstairs. Because the work is the work, and the people on this floor deserve to have someone who cares about the work more than the politics. He looked at him. Can you do that? Danny straightened slightly. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I can do that. Good, Ethan said. Tell me what's running today. They walked the floor. This was the thing that nobody upstairs understood about Ethan Walker. The thing that no performance review had ever captured, because performance reviews at Riverside were calibrated to measure the things Greg Holloway considered measurable: arrival times, documentation, compliance, budget adherence. They were not calibrated to measure the thing that actually constituted Ethan's value, which was to walk through an operating facility and read it the way a doctor reads a patient. Not just looking at the obvious symptoms, but listening for the things underneath the frequencies and temperatures and pressure signatures that told you what was coming before it arrived. He walked the floor for 40 minutes. He found 2 things that needed attention and 1 thing that needed immediate action. a pressure relief valve on the secondary coolant system that was cycling in a pattern consistent with early blockage. The kind of thing that wouldn't show on the standard dashboard for another week, but that would, if left alone, require a full system flush and probably a valve replacement at significantly higher cost and downtime than addressing it today. He pulled Marcus aside. Marcus, who was 51 and had been doing this since before Ethan arrived, and who had looked at Greg Holloway for 3 years with the patient expression of a man who had learned to wait for things to correct themselves. "Coolant system," Ethan said. "Secondary relief valve. You seeing what I'm seeing?" Marcus looked at the gauge. He looked at the cycling pattern. He nodded slowly. "Been watching it since Tuesday," he said. "Why didn't you flag it?" Marcus gave him a look that contained 11 years of institutional experience in a single glance. "Right," Ethan said. "Things are different now?" Marcus asked. "Things are different now," Ethan said. Marcus nodded again, the nod of a man filing information away, carefully, not willing to celebrate before the evidence was in, but not dismissing it either. "I'll pull the valve this afternoon. Give me an hour." "Put it in the log," Ethan said. "Full documentation. I want the pattern data, the inspection results, the valve condition, everything. Photographs." Marcus's eyebrow moved slightly upward. "Since when does documentation matter around here?" "Since now," Ethan said. He meant it. At 11:45. Rachel found him on the floor and told him Sophia was ready to meet with the full operational staff. Not management. Not directors. The floor team, the people who ran the lines and maintained the equipment and kept the physical operation of the company functioning. Sophia had asked for a space large enough to hold them, and they had gathered in the main equipment bay because that was the only space that fit. Ethan walked in with her. The room 60, maybe 65 people went quiet when they entered. Ethan saw faces he knew some of them for over a decade. He saw curiosity, wariness, the particular guarded attention of people who had learned that meetings with authority figures generally meant something was about to get worse. Sophia stepped forward. "I'm not going to stand up here and give you a presentation," she said. Her voice was clear and carried well in the bay despite not being loud. "I know you've already heard things this morning. Some of it accurate, some of it not. So let me tell you exactly what's true." She paused. "I own this company now. The acquisition was finalized this morning. Some leadership changes have been made. I know that's unsettling, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't." Nobody moved. "Here's what else is true," she said. "I have the maintenance logs from this facility going back 3 years. I've had my team analyze them. And what those logs show is that the people in this room, the people who actually run this operation every day, have been doing extraordinary work inside a structure that made it impossible to see how extraordinary it was. That ends today." She looked around the room. "I'm not going to make you promises I can't keep," she said. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything is going to be perfect, because that's not how real change works. But I'm going to tell you this: what I care about is the work. What I care about is whether problems get solved, whether people are safe, whether this company is building something that matters. And the people who care about those same things, you're the people I'm here to support." She turned to Ethan. "Most of you know Ethan Walker," she said. 65 faces turned toward him. He stood still and held the attention without performing anything with it. No smile, no gesture, nothing that would make this moment about his feelings rather than the situation. "He fixed your line 3 nights ago," Sophia said. "He filed 2 flags that were ignored, brought the concern directly to management twice, and when he was told to wait until Friday, with a hydraulic failure that was 3 days from happening under full load, he came back after hours with his team and did the work anyway. He protected the people on this floor." She let that land. "And the next morning, he was fired for it." The bay was very quiet. "He is not fired anymore," Sophia said. "He will be taking on the role of Director of Operations and Engineering Development effective as of this week. He will have a direct line to my office. His department will have budget authority for maintenance and preventive operations. And every flag he files will be answered within 24 hours. She paused. "Every flag anyone files will be answered within 24 hours. That's not a maybe. That's a policy." She looked at the room one more time. "You've been holding this place together," she said. I see that. I want you to know I see it. And I want to build something here where that kind of work, the real work, the work that actually keeps this place running, is what gets recognized and rewarded. She nodded once. Thank you for your time. She stepped back. The room was quiet for 1 beat, 2 beats, 3. And then Marcus, 51 years old, 23 years in industrial maintenance, a man who had survived 4 management changes and 2 near-catastrophic equipment failures and had never been known to make public displays of enthusiasm, put his hands together and started clapping. It wasn't thunderous applause. It wasn't the kind of moment that gets put in movies with swelling music. It was 65 people in a working equipment bay clapping because a person with power had stood in front of them and told the truth, and the truth had matched what they'd been living for years, and something about having it acknowledged out loud in public by someone who could actually do something about it. Something about that mattered. Ethan stood very still through all of it. He was not a man who performed emotion. He was not going to cry in an equipment bay in front of 65 people. He had decided that 30 seconds in advance, when he felt the thing building in his chest and recognized it for what it was. Not sentimentality, but relief. The specific bone-deep relief of a person who has been carrying something for a very long time and just discovered they're allowed to set it down. He held it together. But barely. After, when most of the staff had filtered back to their stations and the bay had returned to its operational hum, Danny appeared beside him. "You okay?" Danny asked. "I'm good," Ethan said. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know Greg is going to come back with something. He's not the type to just—" "I know," Ethan said. "He's already talking to people. I heard he called legal from the parking lot." "Let him," Ethan said. "Let him call whoever he wants to call." He looked at Danny. "The documentation is clean. The maintenance logs are factual. The seal photographs are time-stamped. His own system flagged the repairs as legitimate maintenance actions." He paused. "He fired me for being 23 minutes late after his own decision to ignore 2 safety flags nearly cost this company $500,000 and could have hurt people. He can call every lawyer in Ohio." Danny absorbed this. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay." The afternoon moved with the particular momentum of a company in transition, that specific pressurized quality of an institution where the old rules have been publicly revoked and the new ones are still being established, and everyone is simultaneously relieved and uncertain and watching to see which way things settle. Ethan worked. Not from an office, not from a meeting room. He worked from the floor the way he always had because that was where the information was. He walked the lines. He talked to his team. He reviewed the coolant system valve with Marcus. The valve was, as Marcus had assessed, showing early blockage, and they replaced it in 40 minutes with a part from the on-site stock, saving a future full system flush and about $16,000 in projected repair costs. He documented everything. At 3:15 he stepped away to call Mia's after-school program. She was fine. She was in the art room. She had made something with pipe cleaners that she was very excited about. He went back to work. At 4:45, Rachel texted him. "Ms. Bennett needs 5 minutes when you have a break." He found Sophia in a temporary office that had been set up for her on the 2nd floor. Not Greg's old office, which she had walked past without entering, but a smaller room that had apparently been a conference space. She had her laptop, her coffee, her sling, and the expression of a person who had done a significant amount of work and was not done yet. "How was the floor?" she asked. "Good," he said. "We caught a coolant system issue this afternoon. Marcus had been watching it since Tuesday. Addressed it today about $16,000 in prevented repair costs." He paused. "He didn't flag it before today." "Because he didn't think it would go anywhere," Sophia said. "Correct. Does he think it'll go somewhere now?" "He's watching," Ethan said. "He's been in this business long enough to wait for the evidence rather than the announcement." "Smart man," Sophia said. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "He is." Sophia looked at him. "Term sheet review. I'll have comments to you by 9 tonight. Rachel will be monitoring," she said. "Any issues with the terms, call directly. Don't email, call. We'll work through it." He nodded. He started to stand. "One more thing," Sophia said. He settled back. I want to ask you something and I want an honest answer. Okay. Walking back in here today, she said. The people who used to look past you, the people who are now going to report to you, how are you going to handle that? He was quiet for a moment. The same way I always handled it, he said. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to listen to the people on the floor because they know things I need to know. I'm going to fix problems. He looked at her. I'm not interested in making anyone feel small. Greg made people feel small because he thought that was what authority felt like. It isn't. He paused. Authority is what happens when people trust you to make the right call under pressure. I've been doing that for 11 years without the title. The title doesn't change what the work is. Sophia held his gaze. All right, she said. Go get your daughter. He stood up. He picked up his jacket. At the door he stopped. Ms. Bennett, he said. Sophia, she said. Sophia. He found the word slightly uncomfortable in his mouth, but used it anyway. Today what you did in that bay, what you said to those people. He paused. It mattered to them. I want you to know that. Not because it was good strategy, although it was. Because it was true. And they've been waiting a long time for someone with power to stand in front of them and say something true. Sophia was quiet. Thank you for telling me that, she said. He left. The drive to pick up Mia was 20 minutes, and he used them the way he used most drives. Thinking, but thinking differently than he had this morning. Not the anxious thinking of a man trying to calculate his survival, but something more like planning. The kind of forward thinking that he hadn't let himself do in years, because the future at Riverside had always been too uncertain to plan into, too controlled by other people's decisions to project with any confidence. He picked up Mia. She came out carrying an elaborate pipe cleaner construction that appeared to be based on her description, a combination of a horse and a spaceship. It's a space horse, she said. Because why can't there be space horses? There's no good reason. He agreed. She climbed in. She buckled. She looked at him with her mother's eyes. Something happened today, she said. A lot happened today, he said. Good things. He thought about the equipment bay. About Marcus clapping. About Danny's face when he said I always knew it. About the coolant valve they'd caught and replaced before it became a problem. About Sophia standing in front of 65 people and saying you've been holding this place together. He thought about what it felt like to walk back into that building, not as the man who'd been thrown away, but as the man who had been seen. Yeah, he said. Good things. She looked at him for another moment, satisfied with this, and turned to the window. Can we have soup? She said. We can have soup, he said. The little pasta kind. He started the truck. The little pasta kind, he said. He drove home. The term sheet came back to Sophia at 9:47 p.m. with 14 comments marked in red. Not objections, comments. There was a difference, and the difference told her something important about the man she was dealing with. Objections were about protection, about drawing lines and defending territory. Comments were about understanding, about making sure the language meant what both parties intended it to mean before either of them committed to it. She read through them at the kitchen table of the hotel suite her assistant had arranged because she was not going back to the hospital and nobody was going to make her. Her ribs ached in the specific relentless way of cracked ribs, which is to say, they ached with every breath, which meant they ached constantly, which meant she had made a decision to stop noticing it and mostly succeeded. The comments were precise, technical in the places that required technical precision, clear in the places that required clarity, and in two places, two specific clauses around operational authority and personnel decision-making. He had written notes that were not legal language at all, but plain English, the kind of plain English that a man writes when he wants to make sure there is no room for the thing that happened to him before to happen again. One of those notes read, "This clause as written gives operational authority subject to executive override without process." I need to understand what override looks like in practice and under what circumstances it applies. I've spent 11 years watching good decisions get overridden by bad authority. I'm not signing something that recreates that structure with different names on the doors. Sophia read that note twice. Then she picked up her phone and called him directly because she had told him to call rather than email, and she believed in operating the same way she asked other people to operate. He picked up on the second ring. "You're still up," she said. "Mia goes to bed at 8:30, he said. "I've got the evenings. I read your comments." "All 14. All 14, she said. "The two on operational authority, I want to address those tonight because you're right, and I want to fix the language before we send it back through legal." A brief pause. "Okay," he said. "The override clause is a boilerplate our legal team uses across all acquisitions," she said. "It's designed for situations where a subsidiary director is making decisions that conflict with the parent company's strategic direction. It was never intended to recreate the dynamic you experienced at Riverside. But I understand why you read it that way, and I understand why you flagged it." "It's not about the intent," he said. "It's about what the language allows." "Agreed," she said. "Here's what I want to do. I want to add a process requirement to the override clause. Any executive override of an operational decision has to be made in writing with documented justification, reviewed by both parties within 48 hours, and logged in the governance record. That means no verbal overrides, no informal pressure, no "Greg told me it was fine" situations. Every decision that gets reversed has to have a paper trail that explains why." Silence on the other end for a moment. "That works," he said. "I'll also add a clause giving you direct access to my office if you believe an override is being made in bad faith," she said. "Not through a chain of command, direct. My number, my email, my actual attention within 24 hours. Another pause. Longer this time. "Why are you doing this?" he said. Not suspicious, genuinely asking. "Because the protection has to be real," she said. "Not symbolic. If I'm asking you to come back into an institution that burned you and rebuild it, the least I can do is make sure the architecture doesn't have the same structural defects as the last one." He was quiet for a moment. "Send me the revised language tonight," he said. "I'll have it back to you by midnight. I'll have Rachel send it in the next hour." "Sophia." "Yes. The clause about Mia Tlarn," he said. "Section 7, paragraph 3. The flexible scheduling language." "What about it?" "It's good," he said. And there was something in those two words, compact, contained, that she understood was the closest he was going to come in a business conversation to saying thank you for making that real. "Get some rest," she said. "You too," he said. She hung up and looked at her coffee and thought about the kind of person who reads a legal document that carefully at 9:30 at night and writes comments in plain English because he's not interested in protecting himself with legal language. He's interested in making sure the situation is actually what it says it is. She thought about the hydraulic flags, the way he'd documented everything, the photographs, the time-stamped logs. Not because he was covering himself. Those logs had been sitting in a system that nobody read, but because he believed documentation was the honest record of what actually happened, and honest records mattered whether or not anyone was looking at them. She had spent her career trying to find people who operated that way when nobody was watching. She hadn't expected to find one by almost dying on a highway in a November rainstorm. The revised language came back at 11:58 p.m. with one final comment. This one, not a red mark, but a plain note at the bottom of the document. "This works. I'll sign in the morning." She signed first. The paperwork was finalized at 8:15 a.m. the next day. Ethan Walker became Director of Operations and Engineering Development of Riverside Industrial Solutions, a Bennett Global Holdings subsidiary, on a Thursday morning, 7 days after Greg Holloway had called him into an office and told him to clean out his locker. He did not celebrate. He went to work. What happened in the weeks that followed was not dramatic in the way that people who watch from the outside expect change to be dramatic. There was no single morning where everything was suddenly different. No meeting where the culture transformed because someone gave a speech. What happened was quieter than that, and harder, and more real. The first week was the week of listening. Ethan spent it walking the floor and asking questions he already knew the answers to, because the point wasn't the answers. The point was for the people being asked to understand that someone with authority was genuinely listening. He talked to line workers who had been filing maintenance concerns informally for months because formal flags went nowhere. He talked to shift supervisors who had been making safety calls in gray areas without any institutional backing, because the management layer above them had been more interested in production numbers than in the judgment calls that kept people from getting hurt. He talked to the two women in the technical documentation department who had been quietly building a maintenance history database on their own time because the official system was inadequate and they cared about having accurate records. That last conversation stopped him cold. He sat in the documentation room with Karen, who was 53 and had been at Riverside for 16 years, and her colleague Jennifer, who was 41 and had joined 6 years ago, specifically because the job listing had mentioned operational excellence, and she had taken that seriously, even when the institution hadn't. "You built this on your own time," Ethan said, looking at the database they'd pulled up. "After hours," Karen said. "Not defensively, just factually." "For how long?" "About 2 years," Jennifer said. "We kept seeing maintenance information getting lost when people left or when systems updated. We were losing institutional knowledge, so we started capturing it ourselves." Ethan looked at the database. It was better than anything the official system had. More organized, more searchable, with cross-references that allowed you to track failure patterns across equipment types and time periods in ways that the official logs simply didn't support. "Does anyone know this exists?" he said. Karen and Jennifer exchanged a glance. "We told Greg about it once," Karen said. "He said it was redundant and we should use the official system." Ethan sat back. "This is your official system now," he said. "I want to talk to you about what it would take to migrate the existing records into your structure and make this the operational standard." Karen blinked. Jennifer set down her coffee. "That's a significant project," Karen said carefully, in the tone of a person who isn't sure whether the person across from them understands what they're committing to. "I know," Ethan said. "I'm not asking you to do it on your own time. I'm asking you to lead it with resources, with a team if you need one, and with whatever budget you need to do it right." He looked at both of them. "What you built matters. I want it to be what it should have been 2 years ago." Karen looked at Jennifer. Jennifer looked at Karen. Then Karen said something that Ethan would think about for a long time afterward. She said, "Do you know how many times we've shown people something we built, and they've said, 'That's interesting, but,' and then nothing happened?" "I know," Ethan said. "I've been on the other side of that conversation. I filed 2 flags that got reviewed and not acted on." He held her gaze. "I'm not here to tell you it's interesting. I'm here to tell you it's necessary, and we're going to build it properly. The difference between this and every other conversation you've had with authority about this project is that this one ends with a signed work order, not a compliment." Jennifer exhaled slowly, not dramatically, just the exhale of a person releasing pressure they'd been holding for a while. "Okay," she said. "Let us put together a project scope. Give us a week." "You've got it," he said. That was week 1. Week 2 was the week Greg Holloway came back. Not physically. He didn't walk back into the building. But his lawyer sent a letter, and the letter made claims that were in Ethan's assessment when Rachel shared it with him, the legal equivalent of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck. Wrongful termination, defamation, breach of fiduciary duty. The language was aggressive in the specific way of legal language written by someone who is trying to create noise rather than make a genuine case. Ethan read the letter once in his office. Greg's old office, which he had rearranged significantly on his first day, because he did not want to sit in a room that still had Greg's energy organized into its furniture, and then he called Sophia. "I assume you've seen it," he said. "David sent it to me 40 minutes ago," she said. David was her general counsel. "What's your reaction?" "My reaction is that the documentation is clean," he said. "The maintenance logs are time-stamped. The photographs of the Line 3 seal are in the system. The 2 flags are in the system with review dates. The morning briefing where I raised the concern formally is documented in the meeting minutes because I made sure someone was taking minutes." He paused. "Greg fired me for being 23 minutes late to a meeting. That's the documented termination reason. His defamation claim requires him to argue that publicly discussing factual maintenance records is defamatory, which is going to be a difficult position." "David agrees," Sophia said. "He's preparing the response." "I want to ask something," Ethan said. Go ahead. Does this become public? He said. The lawsuit, if it moves forward, does it become a public record? Because the people on this floor have been through enough disruption. I don't want them spending the next 6 months watching a legal fight play out and worrying about whether it changes anything. Sophia was quiet for a moment. You're asking about the staff stability, she said. I'm asking whether we can resolve this without it becoming a story that hangs over the building. David thinks it settles, Sophia said. Greg's attorney is making noise, not a case. The documented record is entirely against him. Settlement is the most likely outcome, and we can structure it with confidentiality provisions. She paused. But I want to be honest with you, if it doesn't settle, if Greg wants to take this to discovery, then yes, it becomes a public record. And the public record is going to include every maintenance log, every flag, every photograph, and a detailed accounting of what his management decisions cost this company. Then let it, Ethan said. You sure? The truth is the documentation, he said. I've got nothing to be afraid of in discovery. Okay, Sophia said. I'll let David handle it. I'll keep you informed. It settled 22 days later. Greg Holloway signed a confidentiality agreement and received a number that Ethan was never told and didn't ask about. What he knew was that on a Tuesday afternoon, Rachel sent him a 2-sentence email that said, "The Holloway matter has been resolved. No further action required." He read it, closed the email, and went back to the coolant system maintenance review he'd been in the middle of. The third week was the week the first real test happened. It started with a production target. Bennett Global's operations team had sent down a quarterly production projection for Riverside Aggressive, built on the assumption that the new management structure would create efficiency gains faster than Ethan's internal timeline projected. He read the numbers on a Monday morning and understood immediately that hitting them would require decisions he wasn't willing to make. Specifically, it would require running Line 2 at full capacity during a window, when Ethan's team had identified a wear pattern in the drive chain that needed inspection. Not an emergency, not a Line 3 situation, but a real pattern, a real risk, and an inspection that would take the line offline for 4 hours. He could hit the production number by skipping the inspection. He sat with that for about 90 seconds. Then he picked up the phone and called Sophia. I have a conflict, he said. The Q1 production projection versus a maintenance window on Line 2. Tell me. He told her. All of it. The wear pattern, the inspection timeline, the production impact, his assessment of the risk probability if they skipped the window. Sophia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, What do you recommend? I recommend the inspection, he said. We take the line down for 4 hours on Wednesday, we do the inspection. We address whatever we find, and we miss the weekly target by about 8%. We make it up the following week on a clean line. What's the failure risk if we skip? Moderate and growing, he said. Not a Line 3 situation, but the pattern is real. Then do the inspection, she said. He paused. The quarterly numbers. Ethan. Her voice was even. The quarterly numbers are a projection based on assumptions. You have actual data in front of you. I don't override actual data with projections. That's not how I run operations. A beat. If my operations team pushed you on that projection, and it created pressure to skip a legitimate maintenance window, I want to know that. Nobody pushed me, he said. The projection came down, and I did the math and saw the conflict, and I'm calling you because the contract says I call you when there's a decision that affects strategic targets. Good, she said. That's exactly right. Do the inspection. He documented the call. He documented the decision. He scheduled the inspection. Wednesday afternoon, the Line 2. Inspection found a wear pattern that was more advanced than the surface data had indicated. They replaced the drive chain in 6 hours, 2 over the maintenance window estimate, and found a secondary wear issue that would have escalated within 3 weeks and taken the line down for significantly longer. He wrote up the full report and sent it to Sophia that evening. Her response came back in 11 minutes. Good call. How's the team? He typed back. Marcus said, I told you so, without actually saying it, which for Marcus is basically a standing ovation. Her reply, tell Marcus I said he has excellent instincts. He smiled at that. Actually smiled the full thing, not the controlled version he kept ready for professional interactions. He was in his truck in the Riverside parking lot at 7:30 in the evening, and he smiled at his phone like a man who had remembered something important about what it felt like to work somewhere, that the right call was the right call, full stop. He drove home to make dinner. What was happening at Riverside in those weeks was structural. It was operational. It was the particular kind of change that doesn't make headlines because it looks from the outside like an ordinary company doing ordinary work. But inside the building, inside the culture, something was shifting in a way that the people who had been there longest could feel, the way you can feel a change in pressure before a storm. Problems were being reported because reporting them led to action. Maintenance concerns were being flagged because flags were being answered within 24 hours, exactly as promised. The documentation database that Karen and Jennifer had built on their own time was being formally developed into the operational standard for the entire facility, with a project team and a budget and a timeline that Ethan reviewed weekly. Marcus had slowly, carefully, in the way of a man who has been burned before and does not rush toward warmth, started bringing concerns to Ethan before they hit the official log, talking them through, asking for a second set of eyes. Not because he lacked confidence in his own assessment, but because he'd finally found someone who made the assessment better rather than making it irrelevant. Danny was on a trajectory that Ethan had seen from the beginning, and that was now accelerating because it had room to accelerate. He had natural engineering intuition and a technical curiosity that 3 years of working under Greg had been slowly compressing. Released from that compression, it expanded fast. By the end of the first month, Ethan had moved him to a senior role with supervisory responsibilities over the junior maintenance staff, with a salary adjustment and a title that reflected what he'd actually been doing for 2 years. Danny's reaction to the title change was to come to Ethan's office, a visit that was slightly awkward because Danny had never had occasion to visit the office when it was Ethan's, had only ever interacted with it as a space belonging to someone who used it against people, and stand in the doorway looking like he had something to say that he wasn't sure how to say. "Sit down," Ethan said. Danny sat. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up. "I just want to say," he started. "You don't have to say anything," Ethan said. "I want to," Danny said. "Because I've been thinking about this since you came back. I watched Greg fire you. I was in the building. I didn't say anything. I didn't go to HR. I didn't file anything. I didn't—" He stopped. "And I've been carrying that." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "You were 26, he said, "with a job you needed." "That's not an excuse." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not an excuse. It's a reason. There's a difference." He leaned forward. "You know what the right response to that situation was. What you're doing right now. You do better with the authority you have. You protect the people below you the way you wished someone had protected you." He held Danny's gaze. "That's it. That's the whole thing." Danny was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Ethan said. "Now go fix whatever's happening with the secondary coolant loop on line 4, because Marcus tells me it's been running 2 degrees warm for 3 days and nobody's addressed it." Danny stood up immediately. On it, he said. "Document everything," Ethan said. "Always," Danny said. He left. Ethan sat in the quiet of the office for a moment. I thought about what he'd just said to Danny. "You do better with the authority you have." He'd said it to someone else, but he'd needed to say it out loud. He'd needed to hear it in his own voice. Because there were moments, not many, but real ones. Usually late in the day when he was tired, when he felt the weight of the 11 years pressing on him from a different direction. Not the weight of being overlooked anymore, but the weight of having been overlooked for that long, and now having to build something in that same space without carrying the bitterness of it into the work. Bitterness was a reasonable response to what had happened to him. He just couldn't afford it. The people on this floor needed him to show up without the residue of everything that had been done to him. They were watching the way employees always watch a new leader, looking for the tells, looking for signs that this was the same thing in a different package authority, using language about care, while actually just restructuring who got protected and who got left out. They were looking to see whether Ethan Walker was going to be Greg Holloway with better instincts, or whether this was genuinely something different. He understood that. He held it seriously. He went to the floor. It was the last week of the first month when Sophia came back to Riverside in person for the first time since the morning of the acquisition. Not the hospital. She had been out of the hospital and working from her offices in a downtown Columbus building that Bennett Global maintained for local operations. She had been communicating with Ethan daily calls, the occasional email short texts that were functionally just logistics. She was present without being present, which Ethan had come to appreciate as a management style that trusted the people it had placed. When she walked into the facility on a Thursday afternoon, she didn't announce it. She walked in with Rachel and nobody else, and she walked directly to the floor, and she spent 2 hours doing something that nobody at Riverside had ever seen a person of her authority. She walked the operation, and she asked questions of the people doing the work, not performatively. Not the kind of high-visibility tour where the important person nods and smiles while a PR person documents it. She stopped at stations and asked specific questions, technical ones, operational ones, questions that required real answers rather than reassurances. And she listened to the answers and asked follow-up questions and wrote things in a small notebook she carried. Marcus almost fell over when she stopped at his station and asked him in detail about the coolant system valve replacement from 3 weeks prior and what the failure pattern had looked like in the data. He answered her. Thoroughly. In the way of a man who has been waiting years for someone to ask him a question worth answering. She wrote in her notebook. When she found Ethan in the equipment corridor afterward, she said, "Marcus is extraordinary." "I know," Ethan said. "He should be training your next generation of senior technicians formally," she said. "Not informally the way he's been doing it. A structured program. His methodology should be documented and replicated." Ethan looked at her. "I've been thinking about exactly that for 2 weeks." "Great minds," she said. "Set up a call with me next week. I want to hear your plan." He nodded. She started to move on. Then she stopped. "How are you?" she said. Not how is the operation, not how are the numbers, how are you? He considered the question seriously because she was asking it seriously. "It's harder than I expected," he said. "Not the work is straightforward, it's the..." He paused, looking for the right word. "The adjustment. Walking into this building as a director instead of a maintenance supervisor. There are people who remember what I was. Some of them are grateful. Some of them are still figuring out what it means. And I'm trying to be consistent enough that the figuring out doesn't take too long." He paused. "And I'm trying not to become the thing I hated." Sophia held his gaze. "You won't," she said. "You sound certain." "I am," she said. "Because the people who become the thing they hated don't spend time worrying about becoming it. They've already made their peace with the trade-off." She looked at him. "The fact that you said that out loud to me tells me you're not in danger of it." He said nothing. She held his gaze for one more moment. "Go home," she said. "It's 6:15. I have a..." "Go home," she said. "Whatever it is, we'll be there tomorrow. Mia won't be 7 forever." He went home. Mia was at the kitchen table when he walked in doing homework with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Head bent, pencil moving, completely absorbed. She didn't look up immediately. He put his jacket on the hook and stood there for a moment watching her. 7 years old. His wife's eyes. His wife's way of bending over work like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. "Dad," Mia said without looking up. "Hey, Mia. You're home earlier than yesterday." "Yeah," he said. "I am." Now she looked up. She studied him the way she studied things. She was trying to understand directly without pretense, with the uncomplicated honesty of a child who hadn't yet learned to soften her perception of people out of social politeness. "You look different," she said. Different how? She thought about it. "Not so tired," she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I'm still tired," he said. "Yeah, but before it was the sad kind of tired," she said with the certainty of a child who has been paying attention for a long time and has names for things adults assume they haven't noticed. "Now it's just the regular kind." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, and she had been carrying a version of his unhappiness with him quietly, in the way children carry the emotional weather of their parents, not fully understanding it, but feeling its shape, its temperature, its weight. He had thought he was protecting her from it. He had thought his consistency, his routines, his deliberate steadiness had created a buffer between his professional life and her daily experience. She had known. "Mia," he said. She looked at him. "I'm okay," he said. "I want you to know that. I know the last few years." He stopped. "I know some of it was hard. And I know you knew things were hard even when I didn't say so. And I'm sorry for the parts where you were carrying that." She looked at him with her mother's eyes. "I wasn't carrying it," she said. "I was just watching." "Watching for what?" "For whether you were going to be okay," she said simply. He held that. "And," he said, she went back to her homework. "And you are," she said with the tone of someone filing a case closed. He sat at that table and watched her work for a while. Outside, the November that had changed everything was easing toward December, and Columbus was doing what Columbus does in December, going gray and cold, without drama, without fanfare. Just the quiet insistence of winter arriving on schedule. I thought about everything that had happened in 4 weeks. Greg's office, the highway, Sophia's hospital room, the equipment bay, and Marcus clapping. Danny in the office doorway, not knowing how to say what he needed to say. Karen and Jennifer's database. Line 2, and the inspection that found what it needed to find, because someone had made the call to look rather than the call to ignore. He thought about the seal he'd pulled from line 3. 30% structural integrity. Packed in a bag with photographs in the maintenance office, and nobody had even asked to see it until Sophia's team arrived. He thought about 11 years, and then for the first time in a very long time, he let himself think about what came next. Not as a fear, not as a calculation, not as the anxious forward projection of a man trying to survive an uncertain future, but as something more like possibility, the specific, unfamiliar warmth of a future that had more shape to it than he'd allowed himself to imagine. I thought about Marcus's training program, the database project, line 2 running clean, the flag system that was already generating real data, real patterns, real intelligence about an operation that had been running blind for years. He thought about what he could build. He had been building for 11 years without permission, without credit, without resources. He had been doing it anyway, because the work was real, and the people were real, and preventing a bearing failure, or a hydraulic seizure, or a coolant line blockage was real in a way that quarterly reports and management presentations were not. Now he had permission. He had resources. He had a phone number that connected him directly to the person at the top who had made it all possible, and who had, in a hospital room on a gray November morning, looked at the same facts everyone else had looked at and reached a completely different conclusion. He had been visible for 1 month. It felt in some ways like starting over. In every way that mattered, it was. "Dad," Mia said. "Yeah." "Can we have soup?" He stood up. He went to the cabinet. He pulled down the pot. "The little pasta kind," he said. She didn't even look up from her homework. "Obviously," she said. He put the water on to boil. He stood at the stove in his kitchen, in the house that had been the anchor of his life for 7 years, in the city where he had chosen stability over ambition, and ended up with neither. And then in the space of one rainstorm on a highway, had been handed something he hadn't known he was still allowed to want. Not a reward, not a rescue, a reckoning. The kind that doesn't come because you did one extraordinary thing on one extraordinary night. The kind that comes because you did the ordinary thing every ordinary day for 11 years. Filed the flags, made the calls, pulled, the seals, documented the truth, protected the people around you, even when it cost you personally. And eventually someone with the right eyes walked into the room and saw it. The water began to boil. He added the pasta. He made dinner. And for the first time in 11 years, the future felt like something he was building on purpose rather than something he was surviving by chance. 6 months after Ethan Walker walked out of Greg Holloway's office carrying his final paycheck, Riverside Industrial Solutions was named one of the top-performing manufacturing subsidiaries in Bennett Global's entire portfolio. Not because of a new product line. Not because of a market shift, or a favorable contract, or any of the external variables that companies like to credit when things go well. It was because of a documentation database built after hours by two women nobody had ever listened to. It was because of a 51-year-old technician whose instincts had been ignored for years and were now the foundation of a formal training program. It was because of a maintenance flag system that answered every concern within 24 hours and had in 6 months prevented 11 separate equipment failures that the old system would never have caught in time. Sophia received the quarterly report on a Tuesday morning and read it twice before calling Ethan. He picked up on the first ring. "You saw the numbers," he said. "I saw the numbers," she said. "I want to talk about what's driving them." "Same thing that was always driving them," he said. "The people on the floor. The difference is, now they have a system that lets them do what they were already trying to do." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I want to bring the Bennett Global Operations team to Riverside next month," she said. "I want them to see how the flag system works in practice. I think there are 3 other subsidiaries where the same model could apply." Ethan didn't answer immediately. "What?" she said. "I want to make sure Karen and Jennifer are in that room," he said. "When you bring your operations team. They built the database. They should be the ones presenting it." Sophia didn't hesitate. "Done," she said. "Set it up with Rachel." He did. What happened in that meeting 4 weeks later, with 12 senior Bennett Global Operations people sitting in Riverside's main conference room, was something Ethan would think about for a long time afterward. Karen had walked into that room, looking the way a person looks when they've prepared everything. They know how to prepare, and are still not entirely sure they're allowed to be there. She had her presentation. She had her data. She had Jennifer beside her, steady and precise. She presented for 40 minutes. The room asked questions for another 30. Good questions. Real questions. The kind that engineers and operations people ask when they're genuinely trying to understand something, rather than looking for reasons to dismiss it. At the end, the senior director of operations for Bennett Global, a woman named Patricia, who had been doing this work for 25 years and was not given to visible enthusiasm, closed her notebook and said, "This is the best operational documentation methodology I've seen in a decade. I want to understand the full development history so we can replicate the framework across 4 facilities." Karen looked at Jennifer. Jennifer looked at Karen. Then Karen turned back to Patricia and said very calmly, "We'd be glad to walk you through it," in the voice of a woman who had spent 2 years building something important in her own time and had just been told in front of 12 people that it was exactly as important as she had always known it was. Ethan was sitting in the back of the room. He had positioned himself there deliberately, not at the front, not beside Sophia, not anywhere that would make this about him. This was Karen and Jennifer's room. He was there as support, not as the story. After the meeting, as people were filing out, Sophia appeared beside him. "You put yourself in the back of the room," she said. "It was their presentation," he said. She looked at him in the way she had developed over 6 months of working together, the look of a person who has learned someone well enough to see past what they say to what they mean. "You know, most people in your position would have been up front," she said. "I know," he said. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it genuinely. "No," he said, "because the point was the work, not the credit. The point was always the work." She nodded once. "That's why it's working," she said, simply, and moved on. The real twist came 3 weeks after that meeting, and it came from a direction nobody had anticipated. It came from Greg Holloway. Not legally, the settlement had been signed and sealed and was done. What came from Greg was a phone call. Not to Sophia, not to Rachel, not to any legal representative. A direct call to Ethan's cell phone on a Wednesday afternoon in February, 7 months after the termination. Ethan looked at the number on his screen. He knew it immediately. He stood in the corridor outside his office and looked at it ring twice, 3 times. He answered. "Greg," he said. A pause on the other end. Then Greg's voice, and the thing that struck Ethan immediately was how different it sounded from every memory he had of it. The studied confidence was gone. What was left sounded like a man who had spent 7 months with fewer certainties than he was accustomed to. "Ethan," Greg said, I didn't expect you to pick up. I almost didn't, Ethan said. Another pause. I'm not calling about the settlement. I want to be clear about that. Okay, Ethan said. I'm calling because... Greg stopped. Started again. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Since everything happened, I've had a lot of time to think. He paused. I wanted to tell you that I know the Line 3 call was right. I knew it at the time. He stopped again. I had reasons. They made sense to me then. They don't anymore. Ethan stood in the corridor and said nothing. That's it, Greg said. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to... He exhaled. I just needed to say it, that's all. Ethan held the phone. I thought about 11 years. He thought about the folder on Greg's desk and the thin stack of manufactured justifications for a decision that had been made before Ethan walked into the room. He thought about the morning briefing and the formal objection in front of witnesses that Greg had dismissed with the smooth efficiency of a man who was very good at making dismissal look like management. He thought about the seal. 30% structural integrity. I thought about the people who had been standing near that line. I hear you, Ethan said. That's all I wanted, Greg said. Greg. Ethan paused. I hope you find work that fits you better. I mean that. A long silence. Yeah, Greg said, quietly. Thanks. The call ended. Ethan stood in the corridor for a moment. He wasn't sure what he felt. Not satisfaction. This wasn't a victory that felt like winning something. Not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness implied he had been carrying resentment, and what he had mostly been carrying was the work which left less room for resentment than people assumed. Something more like closure. The specific low-key relief of a loose end finally being tied off. He went back to his office. He had a 2 p.m. meeting with Marcus about the training program curriculum, and he was not going to be late for it. The Marcus training program had become by February one of the things Ethan was most proud of. It was formal now, a structured 12-week curriculum, documented, repeatable, built on Marcus's methodology. The way you build something on a foundation that was already solid. 3 junior technicians were in the first cohort. Marcus ran the sessions with the economy of a man who has learned that real knowledge transfers best when you strip away everything that isn't essential. Ethan sat in on sessions when his schedule allowed. Not to supervise Marcus didn't need supervision, but because watching it happen mattered to him. Watching Marcus explain a vibration frequency pattern to a 23-year-old who was leaning forward in his chair, actually listening, actually getting it, that mattered. After one such session, Marcus found Ethan in the corridor. You're going to keep sitting in on these, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. If that's all right with you, Ethan said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. What? That first day you came back, Marcus said. When you walked the floor, and I watched you put your hand on the drive housing the same way you always did, like nothing had changed. He paused. Everything had changed, but you walked the floor the same way. The floor is the floor, Ethan said. That's what I mean, Marcus said. And he walked back to the equipment bay because Marcus did not deal in long conversations when a short one had said what needed saying. Spring arrived in Columbus, the way spring always does, gradually, and then all at once. One week the trees were bare, and the parking lot was cold gray concrete. And then a week later, something had shifted, and the morning air had a different quality to it. And Mia started leaving the house without her heavy coat, and Ethan stopped reminding her because she was right. The company continued to change. Not dramatically, not in the way that makes the news. In the way that real change moves through accumulated small decisions, consistent behavior, the gradual recalibration of what people expected when they came to work. Workers who had stopped flagging problems because flagging meant nothing were flagging again. The flag response rate held at 22 hours average, 2 hours under the 24-hour commitment. The database was fully operational. The training program had its first cohort through and was enrolling a second. Line 2 had not had an unplanned shutdown in 4 months. Danny sent Ethan a text one morning that said, "The junior team caught a bearing issue on Line 4 before I did. They used the database cross-reference. Thought you'd want to know." Ethan read it in his truck before walking into the building and sat with it for a moment. That was the thing you were building toward the moment when the system worked without you. When the culture you were trying to create reproduced itself because the people inside it had internalized what mattered. That moment had arrived. He texted back. That's the whole point. He went inside. It was on a Thursday in April, 8 months after the highway and the fire, and the woman he'd pulled from a burning car that Sophia called him with news he hadn't anticipated. I want to talk to you about something, she said. Are you free at 4? I can be, he said. Come to the downtown office, she said. Not a crisis. I want to make sure I'm reading you right before I move forward with something. He drove downtown at 3:45. The Bennett Global local office was on the 14th floor of a building in the Short North neighborhood, with the kind of view of Columbus that made the city look larger and more deliberate than it felt from the inside. Sophia was at the conference table with her laptop and her coffee, the sling gone. Now the shoulder had healed in February, and the overall impression of a woman operating at her full capacity in a way that the hospital version of her had only hinted at. Sit down, she said. I have an offer to discuss. He sat. I'm expanding the operational oversight role for Bennett Global's manufacturing subsidiaries, she said. We currently have 7. We're acquiring 2 more before end of year. The flag system and documentation methodology that your team built at Riverside. I'm rolling it out across all 7 facilities with the 2 new ones built on that model from day 1. She paused. I need someone to lead that rollout. To work with each facility's team, understand their specific operational culture, adapt the model, and drive the implementation. She looked at him. I'm asking if that person is you. Ethan held the offer in his head for a moment, turned it over. That's not a Riverside role, he said. No, she said. It's a Bennett Global role, Group Director of Operations. You'd oversee Riverside plus the other facilities. Your Riverside team is strong enough to run the day-to-day without you there every day. Danny is ready. Marcus is fully embedded in the training program. Karen and Jennifer's system is operational. You built it to run without you, which means you can be somewhere else. He was quiet. This is a significant step, he said. Yes, she said. It is. I need to think about what it means for Mia's schedule, he said. Travel implications, flexibility. We build the schedule around her, Sophia said immediately. Same principle as before. No Sunday travel. Home by Friday afternoon. Any week that conflicts with a school event, we move the work, not the event. She paused. I've been running this company for 17 years, Ethan. I know how to build a schedule that respects a parent. It requires intention, not magic. He looked at her. Why me, he said, not false modesty, genuine. Because the methodology works at Riverside, because of the culture you built, not because of the system, she said. The system is replicable. The culture that made people trust the system, that made a 51-year-old technician start flagging concerns he'd been swallowing for years, that's not replicable from a manual. That requires a person. A specific kind of person. She held his gaze. You know what you're doing at a level that has nothing to do with a title, and everything to do with how you understand the relationship between people and the work they do. She paused. I need that in 7 facilities, not 1. He sat with it. He thought about Marcus, Danny, Karen, and Jennifer. He thought about the Bering catch on line 4, the junior tech using the database cross-reference before the senior tech did, the moment when the culture reproduced itself because the foundation was solid enough to hold. He thought about what Sophia had said 8 months ago in a hospital room, the rescue didn't create you. It made you visible. He thought about what visible meant now at this specific moment in this conversation. All right, he said. She extended her hand across the table. He shook it. One condition, he said. Mia, she said. Mia, he said. Always, she said. He drove home. Mia was at the kitchen table again, same position, same focused intensity over homework. He put his jacket on the hook. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, this small, serious person who had watched him from the back window of a truck on the shoulder of a highway and had not panicked, who had said, I'm not worried. I was just watching who had told him in the particular unsentimental clarity of a 7-year-old that now it was just the regular kind of tired, not the sad kind. "Hey, Mia." She looked up. She read his face in the half-second she needed to read it. "Something happened," she said. "Something good," he said. She waited. He sat down across from her. He put his arms on the table. "I'm going to be doing something new at work," he said. "Bigger job, more responsibility. I'm going to be helping other companies the same way I've been helping Riverside." He paused. "It might mean some travel, some weeks where I'm not home every single night. We'll work around your schedule and it won't affect the big stuff. I'll always be home for what matters. But I want to be honest with you about it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you happy about it?" she asked. He thought about the question, the way he always tried to think about her questions seriously, as if the answer mattered because it did. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded once, the decisive case-closed nod that was entirely her mother. "Then it's good," she said, and went back to her homework. He looked at his daughter. 8 months ago, he had been a man driving home with his final paycheck and a sleeping child in the back seat, trying to figure out how to hold a life together that had just lost the thing holding it up. He had been the man nobody noticed, the man whose 11 years of careful, consequential work had been absorbed by an institution that never looked closely enough to understand what it was absorbing. And then a storm, a highway, a burning car, and a woman who had woken up in a hospital room and asked before anything else, "How did I get out?" He had not saved Sophia Bennett in order to change his life. He had saved her because someone needed saving, and he was the person who could. That was the whole of it. The complete and total calculation he had made in the 2 seconds between looking at Mia in the rearview mirror and getting out of the truck. But the rescue had done something he hadn't planned for. It had made visible the thing that had always been there, the competence, the judgment, the specific way he understood the relationship between systems and the people inside them. It had put that thing in front of someone with the eyes to see it and the authority to act on what she saw. He had spent 11 years invisible inside an institution that had learned to look past him. It had taken one rainstorm to change what was possible, not because the rainstorm made him something he wasn't, but because it put him in front of someone who finally looked. That was the thing about being overlooked that nobody talked about. Honestly, it wasn't that the value wasn't there. It was that value requires a witness. It requires someone with enough clarity to look past the title, past the organizational chart, past the accumulated habits of an institution that has learned to reward the appearance of leadership rather than the substance of it, and see what's actually there. Sophia had been that witness, and everything that had followed, the database, the training program, the flag system, the bearing catch on line 4, by a junior technician using the cross-reference, Danny stepping into a role he'd been ready for 2 years before anyone acknowledged it. Marcus, standing in front of a cohort of young technicians passing on 23 years of knowledge that would have retired with him if nothing had changed. All of it had happened because one person had looked clearly at one other person and seen what was actually there. The work he had done for 11 years had mattered. It had always mattered. It just finally had a witness. He got up and went to the stove. He put the water on. He reached into the cabinet for the soup, the kind with the little pasta, obviously because there was no other acceptable kind on a Thursday in April, and he stood at the stove in the kitchen of the house where his daughter was doing her homework, and his wife was a photograph on the mantel, and his future was something he was building on purpose instead of surviving by chance. Mia's pencil scratched against paper. The water began to heat. Outside, Columbus was doing what Columbus does in April, going tentatively warm, testing the idea of spring, the way you test the temperature of water before committing to it. I thought about one thing Sophia had said to him in that hospital room 8 months ago that he kept returning to. She had said the problem was a company that stopped recognizing people who actually cared. He had held that sentence for 8 months. He had carried it into every floor walk, every flag response, every conversation with Danny, or Marcus, or Karen, or Jennifer, or any of the 65 people who had stood in the equipment bay and heard someone with authority say, "You've been holding this place together, and I see it." That sentence was the whole lesson. Not the rescue, not the acquisition, not the title or the term sheet or the settlement. The lesson was simpler and harder than any of those things. An institution is only as good as its willingness to see the people who are actually holding it up. When it stops seeing them, it starts dying slowly, invisibly, in the accumulated small failures of people who have stopped bothering to flag the bearing noise because no one will answer the flag. And when it starts seeing them again, it recovers the same way, slowly, quietly, in the accumulated small decisions of people who have started to believe again that the work is worth doing with their full attention. Ethan Walker had never stopped believing that. Even when no one was watching. Even when the flags went unanswered. Even when the credit went to a quarterly report that didn't include his name. Even on the morning he had carried his final paycheck out of a building he had held together for 11 years. He had never stopped believing it. That was why he had run toward a burning car. That was why he had pulled the door. Gone inside. Brought her up the bank. That was why, when a woman in a hospital bed had looked at the same facts everyone else had looked at and reached a completely different conclusion, he had recognized what she was offering. Not a reward, not charity, not a transaction, but the simple, overdue acknowledgement that what he had always been was exactly what the work required. Some people hold things together quietly for years, and the world never finds out. Ethan Walker was lucky. The world found out, not because he did one extraordinary thing on one rainy November night, but because doing that one thing revealed what 11 years of ordinary things done right, done, honestly done. Without an audience, had built inside him a person of such quiet, consistent, unshakable integrity that the first person who ever looked clearly enough to see it didn't hesitate for a single moment about what it was worth. The water boiled. He added the pasta. Behind him. Mia closed her homework folder and said with the certainty of someone announcing an obvious truth, "Dad, I think you're the best person I know." He stood at the stove and didn't turn around for a moment. Because some things you hold carefully in the chest for exactly as long as they need to be held before you can speak around them. "I think you might be biased," he said. "Obviously," she said. "But I'm also right." He turned. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, rocket ship shirt, her mother's eyes, and he thought about everything it had cost to become the person she was describing. The years. The invisible. The quiet erosion of a man who had chosen presence over ambition, and then learned slowly and painfully that presence without recognition was its own kind of disappearing. I thought about what it meant that on the other side of all of it, his daughter looked at him and saw the best person she knew. That was the reckoning. That was the whole point. Not the title, not the numbers, not the acquisition or the term sheet or the vindication of everything the maintenance logs had always contained. This, right here. His daughter at the kitchen table, the water boiling, the future open in front of him in a way it hadn't been in years. And the knowledge solid earned, no longer invisible to anyone, that being a good person had never been a weakness. It had been all along the only thing that mattered. And it had been there all along.